Chapter 929. The northern borderline imitated the Central Plains in many ways. Not only did they copy the harem system, but they also copied the rules of the imperial court. Court meetings were divided into large and small ones. The small ones dealt with small matters while the big ones discussed important matters. In the big court meeting, the minister once again proposed the appointment of a crown prince. The king's expression was very ugly. His sons were in their prime, but he was beginning to slip from his peak, like the sun setting in the west. This feeling of powerlessness was unbearable for the ambitious him. At this moment he finally understood the Dongqing emperor's state of mind. He was also beginning to worry about personal gains and losses. He was afraid that his sons would take away his power and life when he was unguarded. As usual, he rejected the appointment of a crown prince. The king even reprimanded the minister and his sons who supported him. After an hour he was starting to feel a little exhausted. Rubbing his forehead tiredly, the king said, "My dear ministers, do you have anything else to report? If there is nothing else, please leave." Before he could finish, Wu Liba interrupted the king. "Your Majesty, I have something to report." In recent years Wu Liba was less and less trusted by the king. Because of the horse plague he was almost convicted. After hiding his strength and biding his time for a few years, Wu Liba's presence in the imperial court gradually diminished. Thinking about it carefully, this was the first time he had made a report at the big court meeting this year. Seeing that the person who stepped out was Wu Liba, the king of the northern borderline had no choice but to endure his fatigue and continue listening. "What is it?" Wu Liba handed over the bamboo scroll that he had written. "Your Majesty, I have been visiting for a few days and found that the herdsmen are raising a large number of rabbits and sheep. If this goes on, these animals will definitely occupy the pasture, causing the war horses to have no grass to eat. Now it is a critical time for us to recover our vitality. We must not let our guard down. The major horse farms have reported that more and more war horses have broken their legs because of the rabbit holes. This means..." The king of the northern borderline glanced at it and frowned. He suppressed the rising anger in his heart and interrupted Wu Liba. "Wu Liba, this is the court meeting, not your home. How dare you bring such a trivial matter to the court meeting?" Wu Liba was shocked. He hurriedly half-knelt on the ground and made a gesture of allegiance. He said, "Your Majesty, I'm definitely not trying to scare you. Now, all the signs show that the caravan's large-scale purchase of sheepskin rabbit meat is clearly a conspiracy against the pasture. I earnestly request Your Majesty to give the order to immediately capture those traveling merchants and interrogate them to find out who the mastermind is." The king of the northern borderline was furious. Wu Liba rarely cared about the lives of the lowly herdsmen. As the ambitious king of the northern borderline, it was even more impossible for him to care about the ordinary herdsmen. In his opinion, it was very normal for herdsmen to raise rabbits and goats. If there was anything abnormal, it would at most be carelessly releasing the rabbits, allowing them to breed. However, was this a big deal? As for the herd of sheep, the ancestors of the northern borderline relied on herding for a living. What was so strange about herding horses and sheep? Could it be that the old ancestor herding horses and sheep was also a conspiracy of someone with ulterior motives? The older you get, the more muddled you become. The king of the northern borderline scolded and threw the bamboo scroll with great force, hitting Wu Liba's forehead. Wu Liba did not expect to face such humiliation. He did not even have time to dodge. He was hit squarely by the bamboo scroll, causing his vision to turn black. His body, which was kneeling on one knee, swayed. The courtiers in the court were silent. They looked at Wu Liba from the corner of their eyes, as if mocking him for making a mountain out of a molehill. So what if they reared many rabbits and goats? The grasslands of the northern borderline were so big, how could they be eaten up by these two kinds of beasts? Even if they really ate them up, the grasslands would still be covered with green grass the next spring. They really did not know what was wrong with Wu Liba. It was not easy for him to have a chance to speak in the court, but he actually talked about such a trivial matter. "Your Majesty." Wu Liba seemed to have aged a few years. His eyes were red as he called out loudly, "If we do not curb it now, there will be a great calamity." The king of the northern borderline laughed coldly. He asked, "Great calamity? What great calamity? The northern borderline is rich in pasture. How can mere beasts eat it up?" Another courtier chimed in, "Yes, grass is the most vigorous and unyielding existence in the grasslands. I really do not know what Your Excellency Wu Liba is worried about. I have not read the books of the Central Plains, but I do know that there is a saying, groundless fears. Isn't that saying referring to you? As the wise man of the northern borderline, when had Wu Liba ever been mocked like this? When the northern borderline was threatened by the Central Plains, these people had stuck close to him. Now that they had lived a comfortable life for more than 10 years, they had all forgotten their past disgraceful behavior and jumped out one by one to add insult to injury. Groundless fears. That's a clever use of the phrase. Wu Liba's political enemy stepped forward and asked sharply, Your Excellency, Wu Liba does not know the sufferings of the human world. Do you really think that love is enough? You have captured the merchant caravan. Who are you going to sell the accumulated goods to? Sell them to you? The herdsmen rely on their meager income to feed their families. Your Excellency Wu Liba, on the other hand, wants to cut off their livelihood with just a few words. Wu Liba gritted his teeth and said, The mutton and rabbit meat in the hands of the herdsmen can be bought at a low price as military rations. His political enemy snorted coldly and said, Buy at a low price? What price is considered a low price? Go and ask the herdsmen if they are willing to sell? Even if they are willing to sell, do you know how much it will cost to buy them? Don't tell me you have your wife empty out her family to buy them for you. Everyone knew that Wu Liba's wife's family was the richest merchant in the northern borderline. In the past, when Wu Liba fought wars, many of the military supplies were added by this wife's family. Back then, Xianxia's colored glass of the heavenly palace had cheated the noblewomen and merchants of the northern borderline, swindling over 20 million strings of coins from them. Wu Liba's wife's family was devastated by this setback. Now, not to mention funding Wu Liba, it would be good enough if they did not occasionally come to Wu Liba to ask for favors. This political enemy had purposely brought up this matter to humiliate Wu Liba. Wu Liba was choked by the other party's words and almost couldn't breathe. If this was any other time, of course he could think of a countermeasure. Now that he had suffered consecutive blows, he could not calm down at all. The political enemy sneered and bent down to whisper in Wu Liba's ear, Even if the king does as you wish, I'm afraid he will not be able to. Wu Liba suddenly turned around and glared at him fiercely. The political enemy smiled brightly, but his words were filled with thorns. Sir, have you forgotten that it was you who suggested that the king purchase maras from the Xianxia horse farm at a high price to fill up the farm so that it can recover quickly? The imperial court's finances are already stretched thin, yet you still bring up such a suggestion to the king at this time. The northern borderline imperial court was already so poor that they did not even have much food reserves. If they captured the merchant caravans and cut off the livelihood of the citizens, then they would incur the wrath of the masses. Wu Liba was usually quite smart. Why was he so muddle-headed when faced with such a matter? Or could it be that this person was used to being arrogant and thought that the northern borderline's prosperity was due to him alone? There was a saying in the Central Plains that went, Water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize it. This was not only used in the countries of the Central Plains, but also in the northern borderline. If the king of the northern borderline no longer had the hearts of the people, the herdsmen would turn and support the leaders of other tribes. Chapter 930. Wu Liba was exasperated. He said angrily, Are we just going to ignore this and allow the mastermind to succeed? If the king's hegemony stops here, you will be sinners for all eternity. Who can bear the responsibility? Since you are loyal to the king, shouldn't you think for him? As he spoke, his heart trembled. He was so angry that his entire face was green. How can the king fulfill his grand ambition of ruling the Central Plains if we allow these treacherous officials to drag us down? The political enemy's expression turned serious. His eyes were cold. He laughed ferociously and said loudly, Fine, fine, fine. In the entire court, only you are loyal to the king. We are all treacherous officials. But in my opinion, you are also a treacherous official with evil intentions. Wu Liba, you ignore the current situation and force the king to do as you wish. Do you have the final say in the northern borderline or the king? So what if you are a wise man? Does the king not have the ability to judge for himself? If Wu Liba had not suggested working with the Xianxia family to buy maras at a high price, the imperial court's finances would not be so tight. But now, the northern borderline imperial court was already stretched thin and could not afford to do anything else. In other words, the northern borderline was already tied up by the high price of horses. It would take at least a year or two to see any profits. The older Wu Liba got, the less sensible he became. Could he not see the northern borderline imperial court's current predicament? Don't try to sow discord. I Wu Liba am loyal to the king. I have never been disloyal, Wu Liba said. But can't you see the danger of the herdsman raising large numbers of rabbits and sheep? If you can see it and still remain silent, then tell me who is the disloyal one. The political enemy wanted to say something, but the northern borderline king roared and stopped the two from arguing. All of you shut up. Court dismissed. The northern borderline king glared at Wu Liba. He used to like this wise man as much as he hated him now. In order to stabilize his power, the northern borderline king suppressed his adult sons. He deliberately ignored Wu Liba and tried to marginalize him. Who asked the herdsman to deify the wise man and think that whoever Wu Liba stood on was the real king of the grasslands. If it had been his younger self, he would not have cared about these rumors because he had the confidence to make Wu Liba work for him. Now that he was getting older, his health was not as good as before, but his children were still in the prime of their lives. Hearing similar rumors again, the king of the northern borderline only felt that it was ear-piercing. Even though he was slowly weakening Wu Liba, his sons were still rushing to curry favor with him. Which leader could endure this? After the court was dismissed, the king of the northern borderline privately summoned his confidant, Wu Liba's political enemy, the person who had been at loggerheads with Wu Liba. Greetings, Your Majesty. Wu Liba's political enemy was also an important minister of the northern borderline. His name was Xianxia. Xianxia, what do you think of Wu Liba's words? Are they just exaggerations or are they true? The king of the northern borderline was still hesitant. He understood Wu Liba's character. If it was not truly important, Wu Liba would not be so insistent. Xianxia's eyes flashed with a cold light. He looked very confident. I'd rather believe it than not. Of course, 1 or 2 rabbits and goats cannot amount to much, but what about thousands, tens of thousands, or even millions? It's like the locusts in the Central Plains. 1 or 2 may not be able to move, but the locusts that cover the sky and cover the sun can instantly gnaw a man into a pile of bones and destroy thousands of miles of fertile land. Your Majesty's ambition is the Central Plains. Naturally, you know what the situation is like after the locust plague in the Central Plains. Xianxia had not studied much. He was a typical northern borderline man. He advocated martial arts and despised words, especially the Confucian culture of the Central Plains. In his view, the northern borderline was a lion, and those sour Confucian words were a poison that corroded the will of the lion. That was why he especially hated Wu Liba. After all, Wu Liba had learned the culture of the Central Plains since he was young. After entering the political center of the northern borderline, he had proposed to promote the culture of the Central Plains several times. And so Wu Liba was hated by Xianxia. However, the king of the northern borderline was an ambitious man. He knew very well who would be most beneficial to him. Every time Wu Liba and Xianxia were at odds, the king of the northern borderline would choose to side with the former. Xianxia had always been suppressed by Wu Liba and could not lift his head for decades. Now the tables had turned. Xianxia learned from his painful experience and recruited his advisors to help him strategize. He had a vague posture of replacing Wu Liba. What you say makes sense. The king of the northern borderline thought of the locust plague and could not help but shiver. He then smiled bitterly. But what? But they had no money now. If they drove away the merchants with ulterior motives, what would happen to the rabbits and sheep in the hands of the northern borderline herdsmen? Wouldn't the herdsmen explode on the spot? Xianxia sighed. If that's the case, why doesn't Your Majesty do the opposite? The king's eyes lit up. He asked, what do you mean by the opposite? Xianxia said, no matter who is controlling the caravans, Your Majesty pretends not to know. Pretend not to know? The king of the northern borderline was stunned. He could not understand. Xianxia was secretly pleased. It felt good to keep others in suspense. No wonder Wu Liba, that sour Confucian, liked to put on an act. Yes, pretend not to know. Xianxia continued to act under the king's urging gaze. He said, Your Majesty, how can you treat rabbits and wild rabbits the same? Rabbits are lazy and stupid. Their meat is too fat and their fur is not bright. Wild rabbits are alert and intelligent. They run on the grasslands all year round to avoid enemies. Their meat is tender and chewy. The price of the latter is naturally higher than the former. In the past, those merchants could get away with it, but not this year. Your Majesty will send someone to hint to the merchants to increase the price of wild rabbits. This way, the herdsmen will spontaneously catch wild rabbits. The herdsmen will earn a lot, and Your Majesty will not have to waste extra manpower to get rid of the wild rabbits on the grasslands. The king's eyes lit up. He had not thought of this idea. Is this feasible? Harun Cha said, Of course it is feasible. Your Majesty will not have to pay to get rid of the extra wild rabbits, and the herdsmen will be grateful to you. The king was overjoyed. This is a wonderful plan. Harun Cha could not help but smile. He said a few humble words. You don't have to be so humble. The king sighed. He raised his hand and patted the other's shoulder. He said, Compared to Wu Liba, who always causes trouble for me, you are the one who is truly loyal. Not only did you offer elixirs, but you also gave me advice. Harun Cha said, This is what your subject should do. The king of the northern borderline felt waves of fatigue. He asked the female slave to bring his medicine. After a while, the king of the northern borderline felt refreshed. His face was rosy and his eyes were bright. As expected of the secret recipe of the Xia imperial court. It is good stuff for the emperor to enjoy. It is indeed effective. He let out a long sigh. His expression was dreamy. Because of his old age, his body was not as good as before. He could not even satisfy the women in his backyard. To a proud man of the northern borderline, this was an unbearable humiliation. Fortunately, Harun Cha was loyal and gave him the elixir recipe that only the emperor had the right to use. Every time he took it, he felt refreshed and full of vitality. He was even more energetic when it came to sex. It was said that long-term use could also prolong one's life. Chapter 931. Xianxia and Wu Liba had been at each other's throats for many years and had always been at a disadvantage. Now that he had the help of an advisor, he was like a tiger that had grown wings. There were signs that he would replace Wu Liba as the wise one. Speaking of advisors, Xianxia's lips curled into a smug smile. He hated scholars, but he also knew that if the north borderline wanted to be strong and prosperous, the brains of those scholars were indispensable. Coincidentally, among the slaves he bought, there was a scholar who came from a poor family. Moreover, he was a talented person with the ability to rule the world. Not only did Xianxia free him from his slave status, he even put him in an important position and provided him with a luxurious life. There was a saying in the Central Plains that went like this: a scholar would die for his bosom friend. Xianxia felt that the fact that he had saved his advisor's life was enough for him to sacrifice his life for him. Sure enough, that advisor also had the temperament of a Confucian scholar. He wholeheartedly wanted to repay Xianxia for saving his life. Ever since he received the guidance of his advisor, Xianxia quickly recruited his own group of forces in the imperial court. In order to consolidate his power, the advisor also offered an elixir formula, Xianxia powder. Xianxia powder was a miraculous medicine that was highly recommended by the aristocratic families of the Central Plains. Quite a number of scholars liked to consume it during gatherings to stimulate their own inspiration. After consuming it, one's mind would be clear as if they were being assisted by God. Furthermore, it would have the miraculous effect of prolonging one's life and replenishing one's yang energy. Xianxia had some doubts at first, but after careful investigation he confirmed that his advisor was not lying. Xianxia powder was indeed a good thing, only the rich and powerful aristocratic families had the right to consume it. Xianxia ate the Amway. However, good things could not be enjoyed by himself. He first thought of the king of the northern borderline. By offering the prescription of the Xianxia powder, Xianxia gained even more trust from the king of the northern borderline. Mister's foresight is truly divine. Your guess is indeed accurate. Xianxia imitated the scholars of the Central Plains and bowed with cupped fists. Unfortunately, his movements were not standard and looked somewhat comical. The advisor said, "Congratulations, my lord. The bitterness has finally come to an end." Xianxia laughed heartily, saying, "If not for Sir's help, how could Xianxia be here today?" After bragging to each other, Xianxia rubbed his hands and asked his advisor, "Sir, what should we do next? That old man Wu Liba is not easy to deal with. I'm afraid he will make a comeback. A centipede dies but does not fall down. No matter what, Wu Liba was a famous sage of the northern borderline." "My lord, don't panic." The advisor smiled coldly. that Wu Liba won't be jumping around for long. Xianxia felt more at ease. The two of them plotted for a while more before Xianxia left the advisor's tent, satisfied. After Xianxia left, the well-dressed advisor's face turned cold as he stood in the tent, deep in thought. The advisor snorted. Wei Zixia, what are you up to? At the same time Wei Xi rushed to Chongzhou. He changed horses a few times before he reached Chongzhou. Feng Zhen snorted coldly and said, Wei Zixia, what do you have up your sleeve? Wei Xi said, Panacea. Feng Zhen choked. Qiguan Rang frowned. Does Zixia have other plans? They plan to evacuate the merchants from the northern borderline and stop buying wool and rabbits, allowing the northern borderline to descend into chaos. If the herdsmen could not sell their rabbits and goats, it would inevitably lead to civil unrest. Even if it couldn't shake the northern border imperial court, it could cause the tribes in the northern border to be at odds. Unexpectedly, Wei Xi refused and wanted to continue buying. Of course. Wei Xi suddenly said something shocking. He said, the king of the northern borderline will not live for long. Everyone in the tent widened their eyes in shock and looked at Wei Xi. When did you get the information? Wei Xi said, there is no information. Feng Zhen pressed his throbbing brows and said impatiently, say everything at once, don't say one sentence at a time. Wei Xi gave Feng Zhen a meaningful look which made the other party feel baffled. The king of the northern borderline is addicted to Xianxia powder, he takes it without restraint. His body is strong on the outside but weak on the inside, he won't live for long. Xianxia powder? Hearing these three words, Feng Zhen shuddered subconsciously. He had no choice, the experience of being forced to quit by Jiang Pingji was too deep. Occasionally he would dream about it in the middle of the night and be scared awake. Are you sure? Wei Xi said, absolutely sure. Feng Zhen's heart skipped a beat. Wait, could it be, you are plotting something again? Wei Xi said, it's nothing. After saying that he refused to continue, making Feng Zhen and Qiguan Rang so angry that they wanted to hit him. Jiang Pingji, who was sitting at the head of the table, laughed and said, Zixiao, don't tease him in case he quits. Wei Xi nodded slightly and did not answer directly. Instead he mentioned another matter. I am supervising the construction of the provincial government in Shangjing. Someone came to visit me at night. This person is a slave, an old escaped slave. He said to Ci that he wants to enter the Lord's tent and serve her. Feng Zhen said in surprise, an old escaped slave? And he wants to recommend himself? Could it be that this person has some background? This person does indeed have a background. He is Sun Wen of Zhongzhou, his name is Zaidao. Sun Zaidao. I have never heard of him. Wei Xi said, of course you have not heard of him because this person is in his 40s and is not famous yet. Although he was not famous, Wei Xi was very clear that Sun Zaidao was a tough character to deal with. A great talent matured slowly, entering the Nie family of Zhongzhou at the age of 48, suppressing countless geniuses and securing the position of the chief military advisor. If the Nie family was able to expand rapidly in the early stages, it was all because of that genius who died young. In the later stages, it was because of Sun Wen that they were able to dominate a region. When Feng Zhen heard that Sun Wen was still mediocre in his 40s, he was surprised, but he did not show it on his face. If this Sun Zaidao was not capable, Zixiao would not have mentioned him on purpose, right? Wei Xi nodded. This person matured slowly. Although he is old, in terms of scheming ability I am inferior to him. He was better at internal affairs and was weaker at scheming. Sun Wen was the complete opposite. If that is the case, then how did he become an escaped slave? Or was he an escaped slave from Zhongzhou? Wei Xi said, this is a long story. Sun Wen was a low-ranking official in Zhongzhou. Logically, he would not have offended any important people. However, he had a clever son who showed off his abilities but did not know how to restrain himself. During a gathering, Sun Wen's son accidentally offended the Nie family of Bianzhou and was convicted because of his words. Sun Wen's son was beaten and his leg was lame. He caught a cold on the way to his banishment and died. Sun Wen's wife died of illness out of grief and his daughter-in-law. In order to survive, Sun Wen could only take his young grandson and escape. They begged everywhere and ended up in Dongqing. Wei Xi could never have imagined that Sun Wen, who was known as the wise man of the Nie family, would end up in such a pitiful state. Even in his previous life, when Sun Wen was defeated, he carefully burned incense, bathed, wore new clothes and committed suicide with a smile. Wei Xi had seen Sun Wen's body, but he could not connect the Sun Wen in his memory with the pitiful old man he saw. This is also a pitiful state. Feng Zhen sighed. But what does this Sun Wen have to do with you not agreeing to evacuate the merchants? Chapter 932. The 15th of August. The moonlight shone like water and a mirror. Bianzhou of the Jiang dynasty. Bianzhou was a picturesque place with small bridges, flowing water and houses. Every scene seemed to exude a lingering poetic feeling. Thin smoke shrouded the sky above the small town. Figures swayed in the buildings with white walls and black tiles. The waterside pavilions were arranged in picturesque disorder. This was a small town frequented by literati. The people lived and worked in peace and contentment, and no one picked up anything they left behind on the road. Most of the town's residents had experienced tragic times. They cherished their current life and faced it with a smile at all times. One day a family of 3 came to the small town. The man, although old, could still vaguely see the elegance of his youth in his eyes. He was gentle, refined, and dignified. The woman was about the same age as the man. She stood there, emitting an aura of 8 meters. She looked heroic and elegant. As for the handsome young man who inherited his parents' good qualities, his facial features were exquisite, like a gift from the gods. The family's appearance was comparable to that of immortals. The town's residents were all ordinary people. Occasionally seeing someone with good facial features would shock them, not to mention a real immortal. This family settled down in the small town. The man opened a bookstore on the street, selling ink, paper, inkstone, zither, chess, calligraphy and other trinkets. The woman had nothing to do. She would either ride her horse through the streets or stand in the bookstore, staring at the man until he turned away. Although the couple was a little strange, it did not stop the town's residents from eyeing their son. East of the city, Minister Lu only had one daughter. She was tall and sturdy with an ugly face and a fierce temperament. The strong men took a detour when they saw her. Minister Lu was so worried about his daughter's marriage that his hair was about to fall off. However, his daughter did not care and continued to do whatever she wanted. Seeing that his daughter was about to cross the age of 20, Minister Lu gritted his teeth and decided to take in a son-in-law. With a son-in-law in his hands, would he be afraid that he would give birth to trouble or dislike his daughter? However, Minister Lu had a bad reputation and his daughter was a ghost. Even a beggar would not be willing to be their son-in-law. Just as Minister Lu was about to shift his gaze to the nearby town, the family of 3 entered his sight. "Daddy, I won't marry anyone but him." Minister Lu's daughter had good taste. She immediately saw the handsome young man who was about 18 years old. "Deal. Father is here to propose a marriage for you today." Lu Yuanwei patted his chest and agreed. The 15th day of the 8th lunar month was the national day of reunion. Most of the people had already closed their shops, but the bookstore on the street was still open. Where did Fusho go today? When Officer Lu came to the door with Iceman to propose marriage, he heard the woman sitting on the counter from afar and turned his head to ask the man inside. The man replied with a smile, "Isn't it to avoid you?" This person was actually over 50 years old, but from his appearance he seemed to be less than 40 years old. "Why are you avoiding me?" The woman boldly propped up one leg and placed it on the counter, completely ignoring the gazes of the outside world. She said, "In the past I was too busy to look at him, so he felt sad in private. Now that I've been watching him every day, he's hiding faster than a rabbit. Distance makes the heart grow fonder." The man smiled. "He doesn't like to practice martial arts. You beat him all day, how could he not hide?" The woman raised her eyebrows. "Fusho is already 18 years old. His arms can't even pull a stone bow. How shameful it is. His sister can beat him 10 times with one finger. Do you believe it? He actually dares to hide from me. How dare he? I should really throw him to his sister's place to train." The man said, "What's the difference? He just escaped from the tiger's den into the wolf's den? You're too lenient with him. If he doesn't listen, just beat him up. If one doesn't work, then beat him up again. There's nothing that can't be solved with a fist." The man said faintly, "If you're willing to beat him up, why would you bother me here? Now you think I'm annoying?" The woman quickly changed the topic, perfectly demonstrating what it means to say wind is rain. Lanting, don't let people see you as a joke. What did you call me? Well, Ping Ping, don't make trouble. No, I want to make trouble. The man looked at Officer Lu as if he had seen his savior. Officer Lu straightened his chest and was about to walk into the bookstore when he saw the rude woman holding an abacus blocking his way. Can't you see that I'm dealing with family matters? The woman threw a look at him, her eyes brewing a frightening sharpness. Officer Lu was so scared that he took a step back. After a while, Officer Lu felt that something was wrong. He was here to propose marriage. He motioned for Iceman to come forward and state his purpose. In his opinion, this family of 3 was just an outsider with no local relatives. How could they fight against a local snake like him? Iceman chuckled and stated his purpose. The expressions of the old couple changed. The man looked up at them and asked with a smile, "Marry into our family?" The woman said, "Propose marriage? To whom?" Officer Lu said, "To your son, of course." The woman laughed and said, "Look at your face. Even if you marry a fairy-like wife, your daughter won't be any better, right? Who gave you the courage to come to my son's house and propose marriage?" "I've been avoiding arrogance and impatience recently. I don't want to get angry. If you know what's good for you, get lost." How could Officer Lu not hear that she was mocking him for being ugly? He was so angry that his whole face kept twitching. "You two don't want to live here anymore, do you? Hey, you're threatening me, right? Hey, Asiai, how many years has it been since someone dared to talk to me like this?" The man who was named said, "It seems like a long time." Officer Lu said, "Don't refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit." "Okay, I'd like to see how you're going to make me drink a forfeit." The woman smiled and jumped off the counter. She was about to roll up her sleeves and go forward, but the man hurriedly raised his hand to stop her and pushed her behind him. "That's enough of you. Your body has just recovered a little and you want to mess around again. You're 51 years old, not 15, the woman said. "It's not that I want to criticize you, Wei Zixiao, but you're still so cocky after leaving the capital. How dare you control me?" The man said, "Who was the one who made the rules with me before?" The woman was speechless. She muttered to herself with a look of resentment in her eyes. "Zixiao, you've changed." The man said, "If I didn't change, wouldn't you fly into the sky after leaving the capital?" It wasn't easy to save his life from the hands of the King of Hell. Would he die if he didn't act rashly? Officer Lu, who was completely ignored by the couple, looked like a palette of colors. Before he left, he said angrily, "The county magistrate and I are brothers-in-law. Just you wait." The woman raised her eyebrows. "If that's the taste, then thank you." Officer Lu was dumbfounded. Why were they thanking him? A few days later, Officer Lu's brother-in-law, who had become a commoner, gave him a hard slap. "You incompetent bastard." The bookstore on the street had a new owner. In the suburbs, the woman rode on the back of a donkey, the man sat in a carriage, and their child walked on 2 legs. "Father, I want to ride in a carriage." "It's no use even if you call me mother," the man said. "Mother, I was wrong." "It's no use even if you call me father," the woman said. The sun was setting and the bells were ringing softly. The family of 3 gradually drifted away. The scene was distorted and the figures were blurred in front of him. The distant voice seemed to come from the sky. Blood splattered all over the soft mattress, but none of the officials were able to stop him in time. He used up the last of his strength and turned his gaze to a certain place. His body became colder and heavier and he gradually closed his eyes. Ping. Chapter 933. Jiang Pingji felt dizzy, like a rootless duckweed floating in the vast sea. Lu Shi's body was that of an ordinary person after all. He would become weak when he was old, which was something Jiang Pingji could not resist. He could almost hear Jiang Yan's cries as well as the shouts of the officials, whether sincere or not. Forget it, Jiang Pingji's consciousness was blurred. She felt endless regret and let the darkness engulf her consciousness. After some time she felt a sense of crisis. She subconsciously jumped away from the attack. Her agility surprised her. "Jiang Xiaojiu, your skills have regressed by more than a little." "Who is it?" Jiang Pingji heard a strange woman's laughing voice. It took her some effort to stabilize her body. It was so dazzling. The light around her was unusually bright. Jiang Pingji, who was used to the dark, was particularly uncomfortable. She even shed physiological tears. Who are you? Jiang Pingji blurted out. She subconsciously used her interstellar mother tongue that she had not used for many years. The woman was surprised and said sarcastically, "Tisk. You were only injured once. How could you forget your old boss?" Old boss? Zhang Xiaojiu? The two unfamiliar yet familiar words were put together. It was like two pairs of hands combined into one, unlocking the dust-laden memories of many years. She took a long time to adapt to the surrounding light. She was shocked to find that she was in the medical center of the federal military. She looked at her arm. She was also wearing the blue and white hospital gown of the medical center. What happened? She blinked her eyes quickly. She could not react until a person appeared in front of her. When she saw the person's face, Jiang Pingji subconsciously straightened her back and gave a federal military salute. "Greetings, Chief." The other party stood in front of her, squinting slightly as he looked at her face carefully with a scrutinizing gaze. "There's no problem with your spiritual fluctuation," the person said slowly. "Otherwise, based on your performance just now, I would have suspected that your body was maliciously taken over. You've been in a coma for 3 months but you're still alive. If you don't wake up soon, I'm afraid the 7th Corps will be sent in." The human alliance was not harmonious. There were political struggles between the various corps. Jiang Pingji was under her. If she did not wake up, who knew if an outsider would be sent to take over the 7th Corps? By then, even if Jiang Pingji had a chance to wake up, she might not. Because there were far more people who didn't want her to wake up than there were people who wanted her to wake up. Receiving the news that Jiang Pingji was seriously injured and in a coma, the woman had no choice but to interrupt her vacation and take over the 7th Corps. "Thank you for your hard work, old chief." Jiang Pingji pressed her aching forehead with one hand. The memories in her mind made her unable to distinguish reality from a dream. That life was 30 to 40 years long and it was already comparable to the previous years. After so many years, Jiang Pingji could only dig out her shallow memories and recognize that the woman in front of her was her old boss. As for more, she still needed time to dig deeper into her memories. "Not at all, not at all. Cancel your sick leave as soon as possible and come back to take charge." The woman crossed her arms and leaned against the bed. She narrowed her eyes and said, "You should be more careful these days. The federal marshal election is approaching, and there are many people looking for trouble with you." Marshal election? Jiang Pingji was stunned. Was there such a thing? Wait, there really was such a thing. The old general in front of him had retired from the 7th Division and was originally going to enter the parliament to find a job, but who knew that the old general had contracted a genetic disease and would not live for long. For the sake of the political stability of the human alliance, the marshal election had to be held at the last minute. The old general was also on the list. As her successor, Jiang Pingji naturally belonged to her faction. Because Jiang Pingji was still in her prime and held military power, she had a lot of weight in the marshal election for the woman in front of her. As long as the marshal election was not settled, the battle surging in the dark would not come to an end. After sorting out the relevant memories, Jiang Pingji said, "Don't worry, old chief. I will recover as soon as possible and take up my post again." Her attitude was too obedient, which made the woman suspicious. Jiang Pingji had always been a thorn in the side. Back then, the woman had to bear the pressure and strongly recommend Jiang Pingji to push her to the position of the 7th Division. Even so, Jiang Pingji did not restrain herself. She was also indifferent to the old chief. What was wrong with her today? "It's good that you know." The woman shook her head and her tone softened. "Since you are awake, the pressure we face is less. There's no rush to return to your post. First, train your skills so that you don't know how you die if you are assassinated." Jiang Pingji felt that her skills had improved, but in the eyes of others she had regressed by 70 to 80%. With such weak skills, it would not be surprising if she was assassinated on the street. The old chief helped Jiang Pingji stabilize the 7th Division and bought time for her to adapt to the changes. When Jiang Pingji completely recovered to her peak state, more than a month had passed. When she was discharged from the hospital and returned to the division, she had only been away for half a year. For interstellar humans with long lifespans, half a year was no different from more than 10 days. However, Jiang Pingji's change shocked all the officers of the 7th Division. Had they ever seen a chief who quietly checked documents? In the past, they could not find anyone to sign. It depended on their mood whether they signed or not. Had they ever seen a chief who spoke calmly and without sarcasm? In the past, her subordinates would avoid her when they saw her. They were afraid that their guilty deeds would be exposed by the other party and become a topic of conversation. Had they ever seen a chief who was gentle, tolerant, and dignified? In the past, when her subordinates saw her, it was like a mouse seeing a cat. What had happened to cause such a drastic change in their chief? Is it possible that he is in love? This speculation spread like wildfire and even reached Jiang Pingji's ears. Jiang Pingji smiled. Although the news is not true, it is not groundless. The selection for the marshal was in full swing. The situation within the Federation became more and more serious. Jiang Pingji was so busy that she did not have time to think. She was like a spinning top. When the curtains fell on the election, more than half a year had passed. The Federation's military forces were purged. Fortunately, his old boss had successfully passed through all the obstacles. Otherwise, based on the old chief's voice in the election, the new marshal would not spare the officers under the old chief's faction after taking office. These days, it is like a dream. Jiang Pingji blinked and looked at the old chief in the marshal's uniform. She sighed tiredly. The old boss laughed and said, "Aren't you dreaming?" Jiang Pingji was stunned. The old chief said, "You know why your immediate superior handed the 7th Division to you? It was for retirement. How could she participate in the selection for the marshal? This dream is full of flaws. I did not expect you to be willing to stay for so long." Jiang Pingji looked into his eyes, and her lazy expression became dull and insipid. "Then what is this?" The old chief laughed. "This is probably your subconscious hope before you die. You hope that everything will be perfect. What about me? I'm dead. But you still have a chance, but this is a gamble. If you win, you can be perfect. If you lose, you will have nothing." "What gamble?" "A comeback is equivalent to giving you a chance to be resurrected. However, your memory will be sealed. Everything will return to the starting point." Chapter 934. At this point, Wuxia could not help but sigh. Apart from him, who else in this world knew that Sun Wen was supposed to be the backbone of the Nie family and had made great contributions to the Nie family's plans for the world? But before everything started, the Nie family destroyed Sun Wen's family. In his previous life, Sun Wen sacrificed his life for the Nie family. In this life, Sun Wen would probably fight to the death with the Nie family. His wife, who had been with him for a lifetime, died of illness due to a broken heart. His only son, who was smart and cute, died of illness. His filial daughter-in-law also died tragically. If it weren't for his young grandson's support, Sun Wen would have died of illness in a foreign land long ago. For the sake of his young grandson, Sun Wen, who had always been arrogant, gave up all his dignity and begged. The grandfather and grandson ended up in Dongqing. The situation in Dongqing was chaotic. There were battles everywhere. Even if Wuxia did not see it with his own eyes, he could imagine how much hardship the grandfather and grandson had suffered in order to survive. Before Sun Wen secretly found Wuxia, he had been working at the construction site as a refugee for more than half a year. His actual age was only in his 40s, but now he looked like he was in his 50s or 60s. His black hair had mostly turned white. Wuxia supervised the Jianzhou government and used work as a form of relief. Everyone was given work points every day. No matter man or woman, old or young, they would receive the same amount of food and allowance as they worked. The less they did, the less they got, the more they got. Sun Wen's biggest activity in the first half of his life was learning to ride and shoot. When had he ever done hard work at the construction site? In the beginning, the food he got for a day's work was only enough to feed his grandson. He could only find some leaves and bark and mix it with river water to barely fill his stomach. Later on, they became familiar with each other. Kind workers would even give him food and let the older children in the family take care of Sun Wen's grandson so that Sun Wen could work in peace. After getting used to it, Sun Wen's daily earnings gradually increased and he even had a slight surplus. He took great pains to build connections, inquire about information, and open up connections. Finally, he found the only way to get in touch with Wuxia. Wuxia said that Sun Wen would visit at night. It sounded very elegant, but in fact he was in a very sorry state. Wuxia paid attention to his health, so he had the habit of taking a walk at night after dinner. However, his walking route was always different and there was no pattern. Sun Wen could only wait bitterly. After waiting for a long time, they finally caught the fat rabbit, Wuxia. In order to amaze the world with a brilliant feat, Sun Wen even thought of many opening remarks to analyze Jiang Pingji's temper. He chose the most arrogant one. King Wen of Zhou met Liu Shang, and Liu Shang helped King Wu of Zhou to wage war against the Zhou dynasty. In my humble opinion, Liu Zhongqing lacks nothing but Sun Zidao. Who is Liu Zhongqing? On the surface, it seemed that Liu Shi was only compared to King Wen of Zhou. If Liu Shi was King Wen of Zhou, then who was King Wu of Zhou and who was LV Shang? Wei Xi's thoughts turned, and he turned his head to look at the person who came, only to see a gray-haired old man dressed in tattered linen walking out from the dark shadows. Then do you know where Sun Zidao is? Far away on the horizon, yet close at hand. I am Sun Zidao. Sun Wen wasn't someone who liked to be modest. Although he was at the bottom now, he believed that he would rise again one day. This was how Wei Xi first met Sun Wen. Sun Wen had successfully attracted Wei Xi's attention, but it wasn't enough. He needed more bargaining chips to gain Wei Xi's favor. As long as Wei Xi valued him and introduced him to Liu Shi, Sun Wen believed that he had the ability to gain Liu Shi's appreciation. Sun Wen felt that he didn't have much to live for in this life, but his grandson was still young. If he didn't secure a future for his grandson, how could he meet his wife, only son and daughter-in-law in the afterlife? Therefore he could only succeed this time. Failure was not allowed. He was very lucky to have met Wei Xi. Even if Sun Wen didn't scheme, as long as Wei Xi knew his name, he would still introduce him to Liu Shi. Sun Wen offered his loyalty and entered the northern borderline as a slave to help Jiang Pingji complete her great undertaking. As for Sun Wen's grandson, Wei Xi sent him to Wanzhou to look after him and made him a transfer student to the Golden Scale Academy. Not only was he a hostage, but he also made a promise to Sun Wen. Wei Xi also promised Sun Wen that if Sun Wen unfortunately died in the northern borderline, he would adopt Sun Wen's grandson and take care of him as his own son. Without any worries, Sun Wen entered the northern borderline as a slave. In a few short months, he became the trusted advisor of the northern borderline's important minister, Xianxia. Everyone in the tent listened to Wei Xi's narration and sighed. They also admired Sun Wen a little more. He was indeed a talent. At the same time, they were even more afraid of Wei Xi. He had quietly placed such a terrifying spy in the northern borderline. It wasn't that Xianxia was stupid. It was clearly that the level of the spy that Wei Xi threw was too high. As for Hanshi powder, Feng Zhen glanced at Wei Xi. What was Hanshi powder? He had a deep understanding of it. Killing someone was just a matter of nodding one's head to the ground. Wei Xi actually used Hanshi powder to trick people. It was really well done. Zixiao usually looks like a decent person, but I didn't expect him to be a passionate person. Feng Zhen raised the wine cup on the table. Let's drink a big white wine. Jiang Pingji exposed Feng Zhen without holding back. If you are greedy and want to drink, just say so. Why drag Zixiao down? Zixiao's body is weak and he shouldn't drink. Prepare goat's milk that has the smell removed. Remember to make it warm. Feng Zhen mocked. My lord is biased. Zixiao is weak too. How can you allow him to drink? After saying that, he threw a meaningful look at Wei Xi. When he saw Wei Xi's treasured painting scroll, Feng Zhen knew what this fellow was thinking. Now that the lord was taking extra care of him, Wei Xi should be overjoyed, right? Hypocrite. Unexpectedly, Jiang Pingji smiled guiltily and blamed herself. It was indeed my negligence. Someone change all the military advisor's wine into goat's milk. Feng Zhen was speechless. He wasn't a child who hadn't weaned off his mother's milk. Why would he drink goat's milk? Wei Xi, who was sitting opposite, took a sip of the sweet goat's milk. He threw a mocking look at Feng Zhen, who had fallen into his own trap. Serves you right. Who asked you to cause trouble? Go and drink your goat's milk. Qiguan Rang was the only one who put on a posture of watching from the sidelines. His eyes were slightly closed as if he was taking a nap. Feng Zhen concluded that Wei Xi was lusting after his lord. Qiguan Rang was the opposite. He felt that his lord was drooling over Wei Xi's beauty. And it was the kind of drooling. After this little interlude, everyone turned their attention back to the main matter. Knowing that Sun Wen was a spy in the north borderline and a very powerful one at that, they could change their plans. Qiguan Rang asked, "What's Zixiao's plan?" Even smart people had different ways of thinking. They needed to exchange information and unify their standpoint and opinions so that they wouldn't drag each other down at critical moments. Chapter 935. Cause the northern borderline to fall apart in the shortest time possible? That's a good idea. Qiguan Rang finished and glanced at Feng Zhen. However, Zhi used a lot of hanshi powder in the past. It's obvious that this thing won't kill you instantly. As long as you have a strong will, you can quit. The king of the northern borderline is a rare wise ruler. His confidence is firm and he might not really fall because of hanshi powder. Feng Zhen was once again brought up as a negative example. It made him very depressed. A single mistake can cause everlasting regret. Friends around you always use you as a negative example. My heart is tired and I won't love anymore. Wuxia said, it won't take that long. Zhi's situation is different from the king of the northern borderline. Although Zhi has been using hanshi powder for a long time, he doesn't abuse it. But the king of the northern borderline treats it as medicine to regain his masculinity. He takes it almost every day. After taking hanshi powder, he goes to the harem to have sex with the concubines. Even a body made of steel can't take it. As long as the king of the northern borderline's health deteriorates, there will be people to send him on his last journey. If the king of the northern borderline and the chief of Shanghai County Wumashang, can't they see that they have an older and unmarried lord? Feng Zhen coughed lightly, indicating for Wuxia to be more reserved. Can't he see that they have an older and unmarried lord here? Qiguan Rang glanced at Feng Zhen and asked, is your throat itchy? Don't think that he didn't know what Feng Zhen's cough meant. Remember to drink more goat's milk. It moisturizes your throat. Wuxia smiled. Feng Zhen, goat's milk can moisturize your throat. Are you bullying me for being uneducated? Wuxia, this fellow was very naughty. Knowing that his lord wants to attack the northern borderline, he hurriedly planted spies in the northern borderline. Planting spies is fine, but he wants to hang debuffs all over the northern borderline and hope that the lord can defeat the northern borderline with her eyes closed? Doesn't he know that his lord is already very cruel? Jiang Pingji, who was sitting at the head, didn't seem to notice the open and secret strife between the three strategists. She smiled and said to Wuxia, if we can successfully split the northern borderline from within, our chances of recovering the northern borderline will increase by at least 30%. We will remember Sun Zidao's contribution. Wuxia stepped out and thanked Jiang Pingji on behalf of Sun Wen. Qiguan Rang gently waved his fan, his beard and hair fluttering slightly. He said, my lord, the most important thing now is to investigate the details of the various tribes in the north borderline. If it's feasible, we can secretly support the weakest prince of the northern borderline so that they can fight evenly. The more evenly matched they were, the longer the civil strife in the northern borderline would last, and the more benefits they would get. On the contrary, if a certain prince was too powerful and crushed the other princes, stabilizing the momentum of the northern borderline, then it would not be easy for them to take advantage of the chaos in the northern borderline. Therefore, Qiguan Rang had the evil intention of scheming against the north borderline again. Is this feasible? Jiang Pingji frowned. Qiguan Rang said, whether it's feasible or not depends on whether Sun Zidao is as capable as Lu Shang. Jiang Pingji glanced at Qiguan Rang with a smile. He held the fan handle in his hand, the fan slightly pressed against his knees and his eyes were downcast. Lia's hoodie, guess the conversation between our streamer and little Rang Rang through their eyes? Fukuduo, the host said, I know you're jealous. Siwen Dai, little Rang Rang said, I'm angry, I'm going to ignore you. Yongyanunshin, Simi said, didn't we agree to cook this little frog? Why has the lord fallen in love with someone else? Bo Xiaoyan, Feng Tian said, it's supposed to be a two-person show, but I've become the fourth person. The audience in the streaming room expressed that the drama queen's performance was more exciting than the streamers. Of course, it was fortunate that there were many people in the streaming room. Apart from the drama queen, there were also big shots from different industries. Jun Shuaing, I feel sorry for the northern borderline for a second. According to the streamer's rhythm, it's only a matter of time before the northern borderline is conquered. Gui Kai Guofengxiu, isn't that so? Sunwen sounds pretty awesome. Have you guys realized that anyone who has been stamped by Simi is not simple? If Sunwen really has Lu Shang's ability, the northern borderline is destined to be torn apart. Moreover, the northern borderline is still a tribal nation. There is no concept of a big family among them. They are used to fighting for themselves. If even the northern borderline's royal court which connects the forces is destroyed, wouldn't they be scattered like sand? Qiguanrang is even more ruthless. He wants the northern borderline to die of internal strife. By Heduang. If I say that this situation reminds me of the 8 Princes' Rebellion and the 5 Barbarians Luanhua, will you guys scold me? Lao Ciji Lianming. In addition to these schemes, the streamer is also ruthless in farming and training her troops. She is completely aiming at the northern borderline. In ancient times, 3 months of training was already considered elite. How long did the streamer's troops train for? 3 to 5 years, right? She still uses modern advanced training methods. Individual combat is not weak, but group combat is even more terrifying. This is the absolute confidence that they have in defeating the northern borderline. It is undeniable that sometimes conspiracies and overt schemes can indeed play a miraculous role, but the root of the war is the confrontation of the military strength of the two sides. Not to mention other things, the troops under Jiang Pingji are definitely considered the world's elite. If it was the northern borderline in its heyday, it would indeed be difficult for Jiang Pingji to fight. The current northern borderline is just a seriously ill tiger. Even though it is terrifying, it is not impossible to fight. The only problem is, how long will the fight last? The strategist's calculations are just to shorten the time of the direct battle and avoid entering the quagmire of long-term consumption. They discussed for more than 2 hours before the meeting finally ended. Zixiaoste. I have something to say to you. Wei Xi was about to get up when Jiang Pingji stopped him. Feng Zhen secretly winked at Wei Xi. Qiguan rang through Jiang Pingji a look that said, "Take it easy, don't scare people." The two of them left. Jiang Pingji only said one sentence. There is no need to adopt other people's children. It is closer to one's own children. Wei Xi came out right after her. His steps were a little light. Because he had adjusted the details of the plan, Wei Xi still had to secretly inform Sun Wen to avoid accidentally hurting his own people. The most important reason he stopped the caravan from leaving the northern borderline was that the caravan was the communication channel between him and Sun Wen. If the caravan stopped buying goods and left the northern borderline, Sun Wen's intelligence would not be able to be transmitted, and his orders would not be able to be passed. As Halunch's guest of honor, Sun Wen picked up the exquisite life he had in the past and lived a wonderful life. If only Wei Xi did not like to cause trouble so much, driving a wedge between the princes of the northern borderline. As expected, the dagger is revealed. How did Lu Shi subdue so many demons? Wei Xi had personally taught Sun Wen the secret code to communicate with the caravan. It was highly confidential. Ordinary people would only see a bunch of messy patterns in their hands. The style was similar to the ancient totems in the remote areas of the northern borderline. Even if it was seen by others, they would not be able to read it. Sun Wen spent a day memorizing all the notes. Only he could translate the real information. When he translated the real content, he secretly pitted the northern borderline for a second. Chapter 936. Now Sun Wen and Jiang Pingji were 2 grasshoppers on the same rope. He would only be happy if the other party was happy. Putting all this aside, the tribes of the north borderline were still tribes after all. If they were allowed to enter the Central Plains, the people would be plunged into misery and suffering, and the Han people would not be able to protect them. Although there were people like Wu Liba who advocated Han literature in the north borderline, he was a minority. Most tribes in the north borderline were aggressive and destructive. Their destruction of civilization was far greater than their protection and development. Even Wu Liba only learned Han culture to understand the strengths and weaknesses of the Central Plains. He tried to use Han culture to invade the Central Plains and occupy the fertile land. The history books had already given the answer to the consequences of letting the tribes of the north borderline invade the Central Plains. Let's not talk about the past, let's talk about the recent history. The 4 factions of Nanman and the 3 tribes of the north borderline were all different tribes. After the former conquered Nanxing, not even a blade of grass grew. They slaughtered savagely, looted unreasonably, killed, humiliated, and committed all sorts of crimes. The bloody invasion had already aroused resistance and disgust from the Han people of the Central Plains. The 4 factions of Nanman were a lesson that must not be repeated in Dongqing. Sun Wen lowered his eyelids, hiding the glint in his eyes and his deep thoughts. Wuxia told him what to do next but did not tell him the detailed steps. He still had to plan everything himself. The king of the north borderline has 9 sons. Which one should I choose? It was not difficult to choose. The difficult part was to make the 9 princes fight evenly and ensure that they split the north borderline into several pieces. The eldest prince lost his mother at a young age. Although he is the eldest son, he is violent and licentious. He even has the hobby of beating Han slaves to death for fun. Sun Wen wrote the word big on the expensive Xian paper and quickly drew a cross above the word big. If he encouraged Xianxia to assist the eldest prince, he would not do so even if he was a fool. After all, the eldest prince was a pile of mud that could not be helped. Although he was wise and farsighted when he was young, he had been too stupid in recent years. The second prince is brave and good at fighting, but his mother's tribe is too powerful. If he assists him, I'm afraid it will backfire. It's not appropriate. Sun Wen wrote the word second again, roughly listing the second prince's strengths and weaknesses, then crossed it out without hesitation. The third prince is quite close to Wu Liba, even shamelessly acknowledging him as his teacher and learning Han culture from him. Sun Wen pondered for a while. He had seen the third prince from afar. He looked gentle, but there was no lack of ambition between his brows. If he assisted this fellow, wouldn't he create a second troublesome Wu Liba and make things more difficult for his lord? Therefore this fellow was also inappropriate. The fourth prince was born to a female slave. His status was low and his bloodline was inferior. However, he was adopted by the queen of the northern borderline who was unable to conceive him. His mother's family was powerful. However, the Empress's sister had given birth to the sixth prince, so the fourth prince would definitely be a stepping stone for the sixth prince. This could be considered. At the very least, he could instigate a fight between him and the sixth prince. We can think about it later. Sun Wen rejected 3 princes in a row, but he was barely interested in the fourth prince. He continued to count down. The fifth prince and the third prince were biological brothers, but the 2 brothers were obviously not of one mind and were hindering each other behind their backs. The sixth prince was the son of the current empress's younger sister, and his status was the most distinguished among the 9 princes. In other words, apart from the second prince who held the military power, the sixth prince was the most likely to compete for the king of the northern borderline. The seventh prince was very close to the northern borderline trading company. Because of his mother's tribe, he had a lot of dividends in the trading company and earned a lot of money. The seventh prince was not a concern, because this fellow was very close to the 8th prince and the 9th prince. Although they were not biological brothers, the 7th prince treated the 8th prince wholeheartedly. If he wanted money, he would give money, and if he wanted people, he would give them. At present, it seemed that these 2 princes could be divided into the same camp. As for the 9th prince, he and the 4th prince had the same mother, but he was not adopted by the Empress, so his status was very low. Sun Wen simply analyzed the situation of the 9 princes under the king of the northern borderline, and a general plan had already appeared in his mind. To be on the safe side, he planned to use a scheme within a scheme. On the surface, he supported the 4th prince, but behind the 9th prince he would use the 4th prince to get rid of the other princes one by one, and then use the 9th prince to get rid of the 4th prince. As for how to get rid of the northern borderline princes, he needed to think carefully. It was best to kill several birds with one stone. He would not directly kill a few northern borderline princes, but he could further stimulate the conflict between them and the king of the northern borderline. At that time, then there will be a good show to watch. Sun Wen's face was expressionless. He placed the expensive but already ruined rice paper on the candle and burned it, erasing all traces. Wei Zixiao, oh Wei Zixiao. You must remember your promise. Only then can you live up to this old man's plan. Sun Wen's entry into the industry was a little awkward. If it had been earlier, he and his lord would have been able to nurture a friendship in times of adversity. If it was a little later, it would be the icing on the cake. Even if he couldn't make it to the top, Sun Wen didn't have much ambition. All he wanted was a place to stay. It just had to be at this time of year. The lord was preparing for battle in the north borderline. Although the chances of winning the former were quite high, it wasn't 100%. What if he lost? His grandson was still in Wanzhou. Sun Wen couldn't afford to gamble. Therefore he could only do his best and risk his life to help Jiang Pingji. The image of his grandson's young and adorable face appeared in Sun Wen's mind. His cold and hard heart softened a little, but it soon became even harder and colder. Beizhong must die. While Sun Wen was stirring up trouble in the north borderline, Jiang Pingji and the others were eating melons in the military tent. She was not eating watermelon. She was roasting sweet potatoes and sweet potatoes. Where has Uncle Gu been doing business all these years? Jiang Pingji followed the instructions of the viewers in the streaming room and threw the sweet potatoes into the fire. At the same time she turned her head to ask Gu Exin, whose face was full of vicissitudes. Gu Exin traveled north and south to do business. He often only replied to a letter once every 6 months. Jiang Pingji had no idea where he had gone. Gu Exin smiled and said, he went to Beiyuan, Xichang and Shalan. The sweet potatoes were discovered at the border of Xichang, and the sweet potatoes were taken from Shalan. I asked the locals for advice and brought their seedlings all the way back with great difficulty. I just want you to have a taste. Wei Xi was silent and didn't speak. In his previous life, when the Jiang dynasty was established, the country was strong and prosperous. In order to please the emperor, the surrounding small countries always brought all kinds of things from their own countries. The officials of the Jiang dynasty didn't want to be outdone. The sweet potatoes and sweet potatoes were presented at that time. However, these two small things almost caused a bloody massacre. Sweet potatoes were grown at the border of Xichang. The locals chopped them up and fed them to pigs. No one had personally tasted them. In the eyes of the locals, they were not food for humans at all. They were only fit to be fed to livestock. In Shalan, sweet potatoes were also eaten by the poor. They were lowly food in the wild. Yet these two lowly foods were served to the emperor's table as dishes for a state banquet. After she ate a few mouthfuls with relish, someone actually stood up and pointed out the truth. To this day, Wei Xi could still remember the silence in the hall. Everyone was sweating and trembling all over. Who served the emperor's table food that only domestic pigs and untouchables ate? Chapter 937. Aren't you going to eat? I think it's quite delicious and tastes good. For the people, food that can fill their stomachs is good food. The so-called lowly or elegant is something that only rich second generations who are born with wealth and do not know hunger or poverty pay attention to. Not only did Her Majesty's appetite increase, she ate 2 portions and asked the royal chef to prepare one for the crown princess, Jiang Yan. Wei Xi remembered clearly that Her Majesty's body was getting weaker as she grew older. It was rare for her to have such a good appetite. The world is peaceful now, but I, Yan, cannot forget the sufferings my ancestors suffered in this chaotic world. I must always be grateful and put the people's livelihood in the first place. Only then will I not let down the blood and sacrifice of my ancestors. There is no distinction between high and low food. Are you saying that if I throw all the delicacies at the state banquet to the pigs in the pigsty, they are lowly food and not worthy of being eaten by all of you here? With just a few words, she not only smoothed out the malicious humiliation, but also showed her love for the people. At the same time, she handled it gently and avoided a bloody massacre. If she didn't say that, anyone who handled sweet potatoes and sweet potatoes, regardless of whether they were foreign ministers, servants, royal chefs, or officials of the dynasty, could easily be accused of a groundless crime and could not escape the death penalty. If the purge was carried out, at least 2,000 lives would be lost. The majesty of the emperor could not be challenged by anyone. Her Majesty chose to handle it gently and even generously accepted sweet potatoes and sweet potatoes. She ordered the royal chefs to use these 2 foods as ingredients to research various dishes. When they were accepted by the people, they were promoted to the whole country. Who could have imagined that these 2 things could be so prolific? Because of them, the Jiang dynasty did not have a large-scale food shortage. After being reborn and seeing these 2 little things again, Wei Xi's heart was filled with emotions. Before he could come back to his senses, he heard Gu Xian's words. However, they are not popular locally. People won't eat them unless they are extremely hungry. They are usually fed to domestic pigs. Jiang Pingji's expression did not change at all. She smiled and said, they taste good. It's good that they are edible. Wei Xi's expression became gentler and the smile on his lips became wider. Her Majesty was indeed the emperor. No matter when she was, her pure and innocent nature had never changed. Gu Exin smiled bitterly. Little master is still so open-minded. This old servant hasn't finished speaking. Jiang Pingji was drooling over the taste of the roasted sweet potatoes that the audience was talking about. She asked, Is there anything else you want to say? This old servant naturally has a reason for bringing them back. If it wasn't for this old servant wouldn't have dared to send such unpresentable food to little master. Gu Xian's way of thinking was still very conservative. Humans shouldn't fight over food with animals. It would be shameful to say it out loud. Uncle Gu, I'm listening. Gu Xian said carefully. They have a high yield and are easy to grow. They are not afraid of drought and people can eat them to fill their stomachs. They are suitable for farmers. However, this old servant carefully inquired about it. According to the old farmer, eating them together with a few kinds of food will counteract each other. In serious cases it can even cause death, so it's better to be cautious. For example, persimmons, eggs, river crabs and so on. If it's light it can cause unbearable abdominal pain. If it's serious it can cause the intestines to rot. Zhang Pingji said, Uncle Gu is really meticulous. If it were me, I'm afraid I wouldn't have noticed it. Gu Xian smiled. Little boss is too humble. By the time they finished talking, the sweet potatoes were almost cooked. Zhang Pingji found a stick and prodded them out of the fire. Hot, hot, hot. Her fingertips were scalded and she raised her hand to pinch her ear. Only then did she feel better. When she peeled off the scorched surface and revealed the golden and fragrant melon flesh, she salivated even faster. She divided the roasted sweet potatoes into several portions and sent someone to deliver them to Fengzhen and Qiguanrang. The remaining portion was divided among the three of them in the tent. Uncle Gu, you're getting old. Why don't you settle down and stop personally running around for business? Zhang Pingji sighed. Gu Xian traveled north and south for business. It wasn't that he hadn't encountered danger. There were a few times when he almost lost all his belongings. He thought about the current situation of the 5 countries in the Central Plains and had no choice but to nod in agreement. He was old and it was time for him to stop and retire. Zhang Pingji said, I'll take care of you when you're old. This old servant also has filial sons and daughters. Little boss, you can't deprive them of their desire to be filial to their father. Gu Xian laughed heartily, his eyes full of sincerity. This old servant has no regrets in this life to be able to hear you say this. No, there is one thing. What is it? Little boss, you're already 19 years old. When spring comes you'll be 20. Forgive this old servant for overstepping his bounds, but you should also consider your own affairs. His little boss was definitely the best. No man in the world was worthy of her. However, if the little boss didn't get married, how would she have children? If she didn't have any descendants, Gu Xian wouldn't be able to rest in peace even if he closed his eyes. This matter isn't urgent. Zhang Pingji smiled. Didn't I previously stipulate that female soldiers in the female battalion can only be discharged and married at the age of 25? I'm their lord. Every word and action is their role model. As their lord, I can't take the lead in breaking the rules. It's still early. Zhang Pingji's tone left no room for doubt. Gu Xian could only give up. The sky gradually darkened. Gu Xian got up and bade farewell. Zhang Pingji sent Gu Xian off and said to Wei Si, Zixiao, did you hear what Uncle Gu said just now? Wei Si pursed his lips and didn't say a word. Sai, it's not that I don't want to. It's obvious that she's unwilling to agree. I can only delay it as long as I can. Lord. Wei Si couldn't help but speak. If you don't want me to talk nonsense, why don't you quickly submit? Wei Si took a deep breath and hurriedly bowed before retreating. He was traumatized by never submitting. He would be safe if he left early. Zhang Pingji stood on the spot and shrugged at the audience in the streaming room. Streamer V, look, you scared people away by playing straight. It's better to cook slowly. The audience's greatest joy now was to watch Zhang Pingji conquer the world, chase after Wei Si and trick her subordinates. The progress of the former and the latter had been climbing forward. Only the middle one had a long way to go. Xiaojixing, my heart aches for the streamer. What kind of strategy and difficulty are you facing? Hell mode is nothing more than this, right? Wither into dust, my heart aches too. To the streamer, the difficulty of conquering Beauty CI seems to be more difficult than conquering the world. My heart hurts, buddy. Zhang Pingji stationed troops at the border of Chongzhou and trained them every day to intimidate the northern borderline. The atmosphere became more and more solemn. There was a feeling that a war was about to break out. Sun Wen lived up to his previous bragging. He played the political situation of the northern borderline in the palm of his hand. Following the incident of hunting deer and Partridge dying of illness, the conflict between the 9 princes and the king of the northern borderline completely surfaced. The northern borderline had the habit of autumn hunting to maintain their bloodthirstiness. Deeply influenced by the Han family's pursuit of deer, the king of the northern borderline also advocated hunting deer to show his supreme status in the northern borderline. In this year's autumn hunt, the deer was killed by the eldest prince. However, the arrow that killed the deer belonged to the second prince. The king of the northern borderline was so angry that his beard was about to fly off. He investigated and scolded his 2 sons, but in the end he found out that the third prince was the culprit. The mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. You and Wu Liba learned the Han culture well, but you actually used it on your own brother. Beside him, the 4th prince's eyes flashed with a shrewd light. Chapter 938. This year's autumn hunt was destined to be an eventful one. First, hunting deer dragged the 1st prince, 2nd prince and 3rd prince into the water. Following that, Partridge died of illness, dragged the rest of the princes into the water. Partridge was the most revered divine eagle by the 3 tribes of the northern borderline, and was also the totem symbol of the northern borderline royal family. 7th prince obtained a very majestic partridge from the trading company. He liked it very much, but in the end he reluctantly gave it to his favorite 8th prince. 8th prince was naturally attracted by the partridge, but when he thought of the king of the northern borderline's violent and suspicious nature, how would he dare to keep such a good partridge in his hands? He and 7th prince discussed and prepared to present the partridge during the autumn hunt. If they could gain the approval of the king of the northern borderline during the autumn hunt, their status in the imperial court would rise. To maintain the partridge in its most perfect state, they spent a lot of effort. The day before the offering, 7th prince and 8th prince even personally went to see the partridge, and its condition was very good. Unexpectedly, the partridge died of illness. 8th prince and 7th prince presented the partridge together, and when everyone carried it up, they found out that the partridge was already on its last breath and did not have long to live. The smile on the king of the northern borderline's face froze, and immediately turned into anger. He stood up and pulled out a knife from the rack and acted like he was going to hack his 2 sons to death. The king of the northern borderline felt that his body was weak, and was unable to satisfy his harem. That's why he consumed Hanshi powder to regain his former glory. He also firmly believed that Hanshi powder could prolong his life, and preserve his glory forever. If it wasn't because he was old and weak, which man would like to consume tiger and wolf medicine? But now, his 2 good sons praised him as the king of partridge of the northern borderline, and then turned around to present him a partridge that was dying of illness. The king of the northern borderline was the overlord of the northern borderline, and a ruthless character. For power and status, he stepped on the corpses of his brothers and father, and led the northern borderline from a weak state to a strong state. To him, status and power were the most important. If his sons wanted to touch him, he would kill them. In such a short period of time, the king of the northern borderline was enraged, and the fingers on his right hand trembled uncontrollably. He thought that he would kill his 2 sons on the spot, but unexpectedly his eyes rolled back and he fainted from anger. When the king of the northern borderline woke up, his anger was not as strong as before. Investigate. Investigate clearly for this solitude just who is playing tricks behind the scenes. No matter how stupid the 7th and 8th princes were, they wouldn't dare to give him a dying gonging and curse him in public. The only possibility was that the 2 of them had been schemed against. He wouldn't have known if he hadn't checked, but the moment he did, he was shocked. Many princes were involved in this, but the circumstances varied. Some were intentional while others were unintentional. Now, all 9 of his sons were reprimanded by the king of the northern borderline. The 4th prince knelt for 2 whole days before he was released. He went back to pack up, burned some incense and took a bath. Then he solemnly and secretly met with Sun Wen. Mr. is an extraordinary talent. Please accept this humble king's bow. The 4th prince did not like the Han culture, but he was good at pretending and observing people's expressions. He could often poke at the itch of others and win their favor. 4th prince, you don't have to do this. One is just acting on my master's orders. Sun Wen dodged and raised his hand to help the fourth prince, who was still bowing to the ground, up. After the fourth prince heard this, a fierce look flashed across his eyes. He admired Sun Wen because Sun Wen only had brains but no power and he could control him. However, the fourth prince hated Xianxia very much and even wanted him to die. Because Xianxia was an important minister of the northern borderline, but now he was toying with the prince of the northern borderline. When he inherited the throne of the northern borderline, the fourth prince would put him in an important position, but Sun Wen would not tolerate Xianxia. This was also Sun Wen's goal. He wanted to use the fourth prince to eliminate the other princes, and then provoke the conflict between the fourth prince and Xianxia. Before the fourth prince's power grew, he would first urge Xianxia and the ninth prince to join forces and get rid of the fourth prince. In the end, only Xianxia and the ninth prince were left. When the time came, Sun Wen had other arrangements. He would ensure that the northern borderline's royal family would be completely extinct. Thinking of this, Sun Wen's old face raised a somewhat detached smile, just in time to meet the situation. This time, thank you for your guidance, mister, but this humble king does not understand one thing. The fourth prince secretly rubbed his knees. Bursts of pain spread throughout his body, making it impossible for him to kneel, so he could only sit on a small stool. Sun Wen asked, "Fourth prince, please speak." The fourth prince said, "Mister, you have the talent to rule the world. You can remove this humble king from this matter. Why make this humble king suffer like this?" After kneeling for 2 days and 2 nights, not to mention his knees just holding in his urine for 2 days made him extremely uncomfortable. Self-degradation is also a form of self-protection. Sun Wen smiled. You should learn this from your eldest brother. If everyone is involved and only you are aloof, won't the target be too obvious? At that time you will become the target of public criticism. Therefore you can only suffer. The fourth prince sighed inwardly. It was not that he did not know this, but he could not blame Sun Wen for not doing a good job. Eldest brother used self-degradation to protect himself? The fourth prince's eyes widened in surprise. The Han family pays particular attention to the eldest son. The first prince's biological mother is the first wife of the king. He is both the eldest son and the eldest son. Not only is he the oldest, but he has also been running his forces for the longest time. His mother's family is low-key and has not declined. Although the Han family's rules are not popular in the northern borderline, there are still important ministers in the court who like to follow this rule. At this time, the first prince is the target of public criticism. If he performs slightly better, not to mention the other princes, even the king will not tolerate him. In order to protect himself and plan for the future, he can only pollute himself and retreat in order to advance. The fourth prince did not agree, but Sun Wen's words were clear and logical, so he had to believe him. He remembered that the first prince was indeed outstanding when he was young. Thank you for your guidance, sir. In this case, he had to be wary of this eldest brother. The fourth prince consulted Sun Wen for an hour as if he had obtained a treasure. Little did he know that Sun Wen, who was scheming for him, was a four-way spy. He was truly loyal to Lu Shi. On the surface, he submitted to Xianxia, but he secretly hooked up with the fourth prince. Deeper down, he was in cahoots with the ninth prince. How could he not be talented if he could have a foot in 4 boats with ease? When the atmosphere was almost ready, the two of them talked from the internal affairs of the northern borderline to the border. Speaking of the border, they had to mention the Lu family of Chongzhou, who was like a fishbone stuck in the throat of the northern borderline. After Lu Shi left, Lu Shi, who was even more difficult to deal with, came. The northern borderline must have offended the Tai Sui these few years. The fourth prince snorted and said contemptuously, "I wonder what color Lu Shi's woman is." Sun Wen said, "It doesn't matter whether she is good-looking or not. What matters is that she has troops and power in her hands." The fourth prince glanced at Sun Wen and said, "Sir, you don't understand." "Don't understand what?" Sun Wen asked, amused. The fourth prince confided in Sun Wen and even joked from time to time. He said meaningfully, "For a man, there is nothing more interesting than conquering a woman who is difficult to conquer." The more difficult it was to conquer, the more enjoyable it was. Sun Wen said calmly, "Oh." He understood what the fourth prince meant, but at the same time he felt a bit of disdain. Chapter 939. Sun Wen despised the fourth prince in his heart, but his expression remained calm and composed. It was as if he would remain unfazed even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him. The fourth prince seemed to have realized that he should not speak in front of Sun Wen and leave a frivolous impression, so he quickly changed the topic. However, Sun Wen controlled the tempo and successfully led the topic to the border. Master Sun, in your opinion, how should we deal with the Lu family of Chongzhou? The fourth prince coveted Jiang Pingji, but he wanted to use his male identity to gain a sense of superiority and boost his confidence. Returning to reality, he was only the son of a female slave. He had no right to speak to Jiang Pingji as an equal. Sun Wen raised his eyelids and said calmly, "Does the fourth prince think that the most important thing now is to deal with the Lu family?" The fourth prince's expression froze and he looked puzzled. The Lu family has stationed troops at the border and looks like they're going to attack. Isn't that enough? Or do you think that we should first deal with internal strife? The fourth prince asked in a subtle manner. Was it more important to deal with Lu Shi or to get rid of his brother who was competing with him? Sun Wen smiled and asked the fourth prince, "If the Lu family sends troops now, how will the northern borderline respond?" The fourth prince was speechless. "She won't do that. Even if the northern borderline was a starving camel, it was still much bigger than a horse like Lu Shi. She was just a small duke and she dared to attack the northern borderline? Who gave her the courage?" Sun Wen asked again, "What if the Lu family does?" The fourth prince said proudly, "If she dares to come, we'll accept her." Sun Wen smiled coldly and the corner of his mouth curled into a mocking arc. "Wrong. If the Lu family arrives, the northern borderline will be the one retreating." The fourth prince flew into a rage when he heard this. He was about to lose his temper when Sun Wen said calmly, "A horse plague destroyed most of the northern borderline's military strength. Wu Liba offered a plan to buy the maras from Changzhou at a high price, hoping that the northern borderline would recover quickly. It's a good idea, but he forgot that buying the maras at a high price gives the northern borderline a chance to be reborn, but it also puts them in an irrecoverable situation. As long as the feudal lords of the Central Plains realize that the northern borderline is strong on the outside but weak on the inside, they will gather their troops and have another Huangshui meeting. What will happen to the northern borderline then?" The fourth prince's face darkened instantly. Even though he was in the north borderline, he knew that the Huangshui meeting had gathered 23 feudal vassals of Dongqing, totaling more than 400,000 troops. Given the current situation in the north borderline, they really could not afford to offend them. As the prince of the northern borderline's royal family, the fourth prince knew the internal situation of the northern borderline best. Even though he kept telling himself that the cavalry of the northern borderline was invincible, after the horse plague, the cavalry had indeed been destroyed by 70 to 80%. Without their cavalry, the advantage that the northern borderline had over the Central Plains would be greatly reduced. In order to realize their ambition of conquering the Central Plains, the royal family of the northern borderline had put in a lot of effort for several years. Now that he was at a critical juncture of recovering his vitality, he could not afford to make any mistakes. If word gets out at this time... The fourth prince secretly clenched his fists. Lu Shi wouldn't dare to do that, and the other feudal vassals might not respond to her call. Sun Wen poured a bucket of cold water on him. "That's not necessarily true. There's an old saying in the Central Plains. Those who are not of the same race are bound to have different intentions." The threat that the north borderline posed to Dongqing could be seen just by looking at the four factions of Nanman and Nanxing. In order not to follow in Nanqing's footsteps, there will definitely be feudal lords who will respond. The fourth prince's face was as pale as a sheet of paper. He followed Sun Wen's train of thought, and the more he thought about it, the more he broke out in a cold sweat. Lu Shi was not a feudal lord who acted according to common sense. A few years ago she had begun to station troops in Chongzhou, stocking up the fields and provisions, and was ready to fight. It was hard to say if this madwoman would risk her life to fight to the death with the northern borderline. Even though he was unwilling to admit it, the Han people did not lack madmen, nor did they lack the righteousness to sacrifice their lives for justice. With their pride and integrity, even if the northern borderline respected the Han culture, they still could not understand the foolish idea of sacrificing themselves for others. The fourth prince hurriedly asked, "Mr. Sun, you must teach me." Sun Wen smiled. Of course. He wore a smile on his face, but in his heart he had cursed Wuxia hundreds of times. Wuxia was a lunatic who even exploited the labor of an old man to the limit. First, he had asked him to sow discord among the 9 princes of the northern borderline. He had worked hard and lost who knew how many brain cells, but he finally saw results. Before he had time to enjoy the fruits of victory, Wuxia sent him another message. This time the content was even more outrageous. He was asked to help Liu Shi recapture more than half of Xianxia County, which had been occupied by the northern frontier for more than 20 years. When the northern frontier invaded, the entire Xianxia County fell and all 6 cities were lost. Although Master Yuanjing went to the north borderline and took back 3 cities, there were still 3 cities in the north borderline's hands. If they couldn't even take back these 3 cities, how could they talk about reclaiming the northern border? When Jiang Pingji was worried, Wuxia naturally tossed and turned restlessly in bed. As a result, this big hat was placed on Sun Wen's head. Go Sun Zidao. Asterisk asterisk, asterisk asterisk. Wen has a plan. We can sacrifice the rook to save the king, killing several birds with one stone. Sun Wen smiled meaningfully. Killing several birds with one stone? Fourth prince bowed deeply and said, "Please enlighten me, Mr. Sunday." After listening to Sun Wen's analysis, the fourth prince felt as if he had seen the sun. Chongzhou had many soldiers and generals, and every one of them was an elite. There was even a rumor that this batch of elite soldiers had been trained for more than 3 years. What did 3 years mean? Regardless of whether it was the Central Plains or the northern borderline, soldiers who had been carefully trained for 3 months could be considered elite soldiers. Soldiers who had been trained for more than 3 years, what should they be called? The Liu family of Chongzhou was indeed a troublesome enemy. If they were not eliminated, it would be difficult to rest easy. Fourth prince, you also know that it is not advisable to start a war in the northern borderline now, but we cannot let Chongzhou see any clues. Sun Wen's deep voice traveled into his ears, like a teacher of an academy teaching earnestly. The fourth prince subconsciously straightened his back and listened attentively. If that is the case, we might as well take another path and sacrifice the rook to save the king. Aren't the 3 cities of Chongzhou and Xianxia County the best candidates to be discarded? After hearing this, the fourth prince felt a wave of displeasure. He looked at Sun Wen with a suspicious gaze. This Sun Wen before him was also a citizen of the Han family. Are you saying that we should abandon the 3 cities? Sun Wen acted as if he did not see the fourth prince's suspicion and wariness. He smiled mysteriously and said, "No." The fourth prince's heart sank. He pestered him and said, "Please don't tease me. Just say what you have to say." To the northern borderline, the 3 cities are not even of any value. The fourth prince interrupted him. How dare you say that? A murderous intent emerged in his heart. Sun Wen said, "I'm afraid the fourth prince doesn't know the situation in the 3 cities. The Han people have either escaped or died. At the very least, they have been captured and sold as slaves. The fertile fields are idle and no one cultivates them. The houses leak and no one repairs them. The city walls are deserted and no one guards them. Among the people in the city, how many Han people are doing business properly? To the northern borderline, how is such a place different from the slums? The 3 cities were already deserted and had no value. Even their strategic value was greatly reduced. The once prosperous cities were now just places where the northern borderline's horse bandits or criminals hid. The northern borderline was the same as the southern barbarians. Their nature of destruction and plundering was far superior to governance. They would rob, kill, and plunder. The only thing they would not do was run properly. Chapter 940. Even so, the fourth prince still threatened him with a sentence. "Mr. Sun, aren't you afraid that I will punish you or even kill you for saying this in front of me?" As soon as he finished speaking, the fourth prince's eyes emitted a terrifying killing intent, and the scimitar at his waist was already unsheathed. "Of course I'm afraid. Who wouldn't be afraid of death? Although this old man is 46 this year, I haven't lived long enough." Sun Wen was calm and composed. He looked at Prince Roland with a faint smile, his eyes shining with wisdom and confidence. His eyes clearly conveyed a message. He was not afraid. He was not afraid of the threat of death from Prince Roland. He did not even think that Prince Roland would really punish him. The two of them stared at each other for a long time. The fourth prince gasped for breath, with beads of sweat dripping from his forehead. He raised his hand and sheathed his scimitar. Forget it. If Mr. Sun has anything to say, just say it. I will listen. After saying that, he sat back down unwillingly. How could the fourth prince be a match for Sun when it came to scheming? In terms of mental fortitude, Sun Wen had attained the transcendent realm of being able to remain unfazed even if Mount Tai were to collapse in front of him. In the end, Sun Wen won, completely dispelling the fourth prince's suspicions. Sun Wen said with a smile, "The 3 cities of Xianxia County are tasteless, but it's not a pity to abandon them. It's better to make good use of them. If we use it as bait, we can injure Zhou Xian and prevent her from sending troops to threaten the northern borderline for a year or two. At the same time, we can also help His Highness get rid of his greatest threat." The fourth prince's eyes flashed fiercely as he said, "My mortal enemy?" Sun Wen said, "The northern borderline has always been particular about choosing talents and talents. Regardless of one's background, the fourth prince is naturally qualified to ascend to the throne. According to the inheritance system of the Han family, even if all his brothers died, the fourth prince would not have the right to inherit the throne. Who asked his mother to be a female slave for others to play with. However, the customs of Beijiang were different from those of the Central Plains. There were no rules in the northern borderline. Whichever child was stronger could inherit more property. Even if Prince Roland was just the son of a slave girl, he was still qualified to inherit the throne as long as he was strong enough. Sun Wen's short sentence quickly and accurately poked the fourth prince's weak spot. Prince Roland's hand that was holding the machete trembled, and even his breathing stopped suspiciously. Of course, he knew that he was qualified, but being qualified did not mean that he had hope. His mother's clan was too weak and barren. His starting point was the lowest among his brothers. If he wanted to overthrow the 8 brothers around him and ascend the throne, he would have to overcome 5 trials and kill 6 generals. You think I have hope? The fourth prince's breathing quickened. Sun Wenning had laid out such an inescapable trap. If Sun Wenning helped him with all his might, it might not be impossible for him to inherit the throne. Where there's a will, there's a way. How would you know if you don't try? Sun Wen's expression was indifferent. He didn't show any joy or sorrow, as if he was detached from the world. Among the 9 princes, the second prince has the strongest army. If the fourth prince wants to lay his hands on the throne, he will be the first person you have to get rid of. The first prince was using self-defiling methods to protect himself, but he was also secretly accumulating power, so he had to be on guard. Wen had a plan, killing several birds with one stone. Using the 3 cities of Xianxia County in exchange for Zhou Xian being unable to mobilize his troops and for the first and second princes to be crippled. Do you think it's worth it? If he said that to Jiang Pingji, she would probably have twisted his head off long ago. Do you know what it means to not give an inch of land? Even if the land was left to grow weeds or turned into a cesspool, others could not even think about getting a piece of it. Jiang Pingji had once used the muzzle of a gun to poke the forehead of a neighbor from the Federation in order to negotiate with him. The 7th Army Corps was one of the 3 main battle armies. She directly spoke to the messenger. Either he retracted his leg or he started a war. Fortunately, the person Sun Wen was talking to was the 4th prince and not the cruel Jiang Pingji. The 4th prince's eyelids twitched violently and his heart beat wildly. He was about the same age as the 1st and 2nd princes. When he was young, he was bullied, humiliated, and bullied by the 2. For the 4th prince, the 2 were like 2 mountains piled in front of him, so tall that it made him feel hopeless. At that moment, Sun Wen told him that he could get rid of the 2 of them and even prevent Zhou Xian from mobilizing his troops. "Master, tell me quickly." The 4th prince clenched his fists nervously. Unknowingly, his emotions had been completely controlled by Sun Wen. "Your Highness, come closer." Sun Wen lowered his eyelids, and the 4th prince hurriedly leaned forward to listen. "Master Sun, please speak. Now is the end of the autumn grain harvest, and the grain is gradually being stored in the granary. The 2nd prince is impatient and eager for quick success, but he is not good at management. In recent years, the price of grain in the north borderline has increased greatly. He keeps so many private soldiers under him, and the grain has long been unable to make ends meet. The 4th prince, why don't you privately create a map of the granary in Chongzhou and reveal it to the 2nd prince? With the 2nd prince's temperament, he will definitely keep it a secret and take all the benefits for himself. What was harvesting? The troops and horses were not given rations and there was no logistical support. They completely relied on the soldiers to raise their own rations, plunder from the people and be self-sufficient. The North Borderline cavalry often harassed the people of Chongzhou, raided houses and plundered rations. At first, when they found out that Jiang Pingji was in Chongzhou, they wanted to repeat the same trick. However, Jiang Pingji was too cunning. Every year the location of the granary was different. The North Borderline tried harvesting, but other than the first small victory, the troops who went to harvest almost starved to death in Chongzhou. After suffering a few losses, they knew that it was not easy to take advantage of Jiang Pingji. Harvesting was not very effective. Nowadays, the North Borderline rarely organized large-scale cavalry to harvest. If the second prince wanted to take all the autumn grain for himself without anyone knowing, he definitely could not approach the border in the name of harvesting. Sun Wen continued, in this way, to prevent the outside world from knowing, the second prince will definitely take the initiative to ask for permission to guard the 3 cities of Xianxia. The fourth prince will then play a small trick and send people disguised as Lu Shi's troops to kill a few of his personal guards. The second prince will blame this on Lu Shi. However, you must remember you must not let your own personal guards disguise themselves. It is best to let the first prince's people do it. Even if the deed is exposed, others will only find out that it was the first prince who did it, and deliberately incite the second prince and Lu Shi to fight. The fourth prince nodded as he listened. Sun Wen continued, Lu Shi has an explosive personality, and the second prince is obstinate and self-opinionated. If the two of them meet, it is impossible that they will not fight. However, no matter how many troops the second prince has, how long can he resist Lu Shi? The 3 cities of Xianxia County have not been repaired for many years. They will not be able to resist Lu Shi's powerful troops. If the second prince dies in battle, it will be fine, but if he doesn't, not only will he lose the private troops he has carefully raised, but he will also let the king see the number of troops he has and his ambition. As for the first prince who deliberately provoked the war between the 2 sides, it will not be good either. As the fourth prince listened, he felt a chill in his heart, but at the same time he could not suppress his excitement. Very quickly he came back to his senses. What about Lu Shi? Sun Wen laughed. The 3 cities of Xianxia are already in ruins. Lu Shi has to deal with the aftermath after conquering them. Isn't this a good way to divert his energy? Within a year or 2, how will he have the energy to start another war? The fourth prince's eyes lit up. Yes, as long as the situation in the North Borderline was peaceful for a year or 2. Master is indeed brilliant. Chapter 941. Sun Wen was stirring up trouble in the Northern Borderline. He was full of conspiracies and tricks. Jiang Pingji was also ready for war. It was the autumn harvest. Everyone was so busy that their feet hardly touched the ground. When the autumn grain entered the warehouse, they felt more relaxed. This year's batch of autumn grain has entered the warehouse. Qiguan Rang presented a thick account book. Every grain collected was recorded in the book. Jiang Pingji flipped through it carefully. With this batch of grain we have the confidence to fight a war. Is there any news from Zixiao? Qiguan Rang held his hands by his sides and said expressionlessly, there's no news yet, but it should be soon. Jiang Pingji nodded and did not respond. Qiguan Rang endured for a while and had to take the initiative to speak. My lord has never seen Sun Wen. How do you know that he's as capable as Lu Shang? You trust him so easily. If he covets the power of the Northern Borderline. Qiguan Rang did not finish his sentence, but he believed that Jiang Pingji knew what he meant. We have to guard against him. Jiang Pingji said with a smile, I don't know if Sun Wen is as capable as Lu Shang, but it's enough for Zixiao to know. Qiguan Rang showed an expression that said, I knew it. He sighed and said, my lord has grown up. A cabbage had grown up and finally knew how to feed a pig. Look at what you're saying. It's as if the cabbage you painstakingly raised has been fed by a pig. Jiang Pingji teased, you're so jealous. Qiguan Rang secretly rolled his eyes and added in his heart, isn't it the other way around? He trusted Wei Xi's judgment because he trusted him. If not for some kind of honey filter, he believed that his lord would not be so rash. He frowned and said, my lord, when did you have such thoughts? After all, she was a female lord and was often criticized. If she could not maintain a clear relationship with her subordinates, her reputation might be tarnished. When did it happen? I can't remember. But Wenjing, you can rest assured that Zixiao will not affect my ambitions. Qiguan Rang had been observing the surrounding situation as an outsider. He saw the situation more clearly than the people involved. I'm not worried about my lord but about Zixiao. Qiguan Rang frowned. Wei Ci did not deliberately steal the limelight. He did not have a strong presence, but after thinking about what he had done, no one could say that he was not a pillar. Such a talent shouldn't be buried, nor should he be confined in a cage like a canary. If he didn't do that and allowed him to show off his talent, he would definitely die. Even if the Lord did not mind, would the other officials not have any thoughts about it? The most important thing for a faction was harmony and unity. Does it really have to be him? Asked Qiguan Rang. It has to be him. The more I get to know him, the more I feel that he's the one I want, Jiang Pingji said with certainty. Ambitious man who wants to be a canary. If he doesn't want to live an ignoble life, I'm afraid my lord won't bear to let him suffer. If his identity was revealed, Wei Ci would have to stay away from the center of power. It wasn't that they didn't trust him, but it was for the sake of unity within the faction so that others wouldn't feel unbalanced or have negative emotions. If Jiang Pingji insisted on having her own way, she might harm her and Wei Ci. Then what does Wenjing think? Qiguan Rang said, it's better to keep it a secret. Rang can pretend that he doesn't know anything. Keep it a secret? Jiang Pingji murmured repeatedly. As long as it's the Lord's child, it will definitely be your blood. It doesn't matter who the father is. Qiguan Rang said, you can say that you got pregnant because of feelings or that you got married and had a child in your dream. As long as you have a child, you can keep the father's identity a secret. As long as others don't know who the father is, Zixiao can also continue to realize his ambitions and aspirations. But in this way my lord and Zixiao will have to suffer. Jiang Pingji thought about it for a long time and laughed bitterly after a while. Wenjing, you're thinking too far ahead. We'll have to face it sooner or later. Qiguan Rang took over the account book that Jiang Pingji had finished reviewing and said expressionlessly, you should also pay attention to your emotions. What happens in private is none of my business. In daily life, you should at least control your emotions. Just like the previous time, she looked at Wei Ci as if she wanted to skin him alive. It was always like that. Even the slow-witted generals could notice the clues. Qiguan Rang also reminded her in private to prevent his lord from doing something that she would regret for the rest of her life in the heat of youth. Wenjing, I'll think about it. Although she didn't want to admit it, Qiguan Rang's solution was considered the best of both worlds. It's still troubled times now. It's not suitable to think about these matters. We'd better get down to business. Jiang Pingji changed the topic stiffly. Qiguan Rang could only roll his eyes helplessly. As they were talking, Wei Ci was summoned from outside the tent. Greetings, my lord. Wei Ci first bowed, then nodded to Qiguan Rang who was sitting next to Jiang Pingji. He took the initiative to sit on the other side. This is the tip-off I just received. The big fish has taken the bait. Wei Ci handed over the booklet with both hands. Jiang Pingji took it and glanced at it. This Sun Wen is truly capable. This trick within a trick is truly beautiful. The letter said that Sun Wen had secretly plotted and successfully made the second prince of the northern borderline volunteer to take the order to be stationed in the 3 cities of Xianxia. The 3 cities of Xianxia were not the same as before. There was no profit to be made. They were almost treated as a place of exile by the nobles of the northern borderline. The second prince wanted to gild himself. Why did he have to go to the 3 cities of Xianxia? Self-exile? When the other princes received the news, they all had the same thought. But when they thought of the second prince's usual arrogance, they felt that it was unlikely. But other than that, they could not think of a reason why the second prince would take the initiative to go to the 3 cities of Xianxia. The princes of the northern borderline discussed in private. Does the second prince think that the 3 cities of Xianxia can still recruit soldiers and buy horses? He might really think so. But there is no profit to be made in the 3 cities of Xianxia. He will only be disappointed if he goes. Maybe he's advancing by retreating? Using this to gain father's favor? If that's the case, this move is too lame. These people would not be able to figure it out even if they racked their brains. The second prince had a detailed distribution map of Chongzhou's granaries. According to reliable sources, the granaries stored Chongzhou's savings over the years. As long as the grain was taken away, Luxi would probably suffer a great loss. The second prince thought proudly. It was as if he could already see himself bringing back a huge amount of grain and being rewarded by the king. He had more soldiers in his hands than his other brothers. If he made a great contribution, he would not be far from the throne of the king of the northern borderline. Of course, the second prince was not stupid. He had already sent people to check the marked places in the granary beforehand. The news was true. Apart from that, this map was sent by his most trusted confidant, his mother's brother, his uncle. He trusted it so much because of all these reasons. Because of the huge amount of grain, the second prince made up his mind and pulled out all his private soldiers. Let's go. Chapter 942. The second prince rode a tall horse leisurely. This is Nanshan County of Xianxia County? Doesn't look like much. It's not as prosperous as a small tribe in the north borderline. The houses on both sides of the street were dilapidated, and there were almost no traces of merchants. I heard that Xianxia County was a good place in the past, where merchants and trade flourished. Things remain the same, but the people have changed. The second prince's advisor rode a step behind, looking around and sighing. It's just a small town at the border of the Central Plains. How prosperous can it be? The second prince laughed disdainfully. He brought 20,000 private troops to camp outside the city, while he brought 1,000 elites into the city. He spent all his fortune to train these 20,000 elites, and he loved them as if they were his eyes. In order to keep the benefits to himself, he gritted his teeth, made up his mind, and took out all his belongings. He volunteered to the king of the north borderline to take over the 3 cities of Xianxia. The original guards were sent elsewhere. The second prince sat down boldly. The official registrar of Nanshan County trembled in front of him, waiting for orders. Report how many soldiers are left in the city. The official registrar trembled and said, there are 6,700 guards in the city. The second prince turned his head and sneered at the advisor. There are only 6,700 people in Nanshan County. What can such a small number of guards do? Luxi of Chongzhou is also a good for nothing. I heard that the pedantic Confucian scholars of Dongqing always talk about taking back their territory. Nanshan County's defense is so weak, yet Luxi doesn't send troops to fight back? It seems that the cowards of Dongqing are just shouting slogans when they take back their territory. The advisor smiled and flattered the second prince, saying a lot of good things, making the second prince feel comfortable. The second prince was full of confidence and spoke with fervor. Although Luxi is a bit of a coward, she's a girl after all. It's normal that she's not as courageous as a man. Although there are only 6,700 guards in Nanshan County, every one of them is an elite of the north borderline. They can fight against 10 men on the battlefield. Luxi is flattered by the outside world, but she's still a timid girl. She won't amount to much. The advisor's smile was a little awkward, but he still catered to the second prince and praised him. Compared to the second prince's blind arrogance, the advisor was somewhat clear-headed. Apart from anything else, he could understand why Jiang Pingji had not mobilized her troops to recapture the 3 cities of Xianxia. First of all, fighting a war was not something that could be fought just because one wanted to. No matter how resentful the people of Dongqing were, the 3 cities of Xianxia had been ceded by Dongqing to the northern borderline. This was the territory of the northern borderline. If they rashly sent their troops back, it would mean that they would completely fall out with the northern borderline and officially declare war on the northern borderline. Secondly, fighting a war would consume too much energy and the preparation would take a long time. If they were to start a war without any preparation, how was that any different from courting death? Thirdly, since the 3 cities of Xianxia had been ruined by the northern frontier, it would not make much difference whether they were recaptured 2 years earlier or 2 years later. He did not dare to say these words to the second prince, lest he spoil his mood. Your Highness is right. The second prince laughed heartily and said to his advisor, you know me best. Overjoyed, the second prince feasted for 2 days and made friends with the local nobles. Although these nobles stayed in the 3 cities of Xianxia as if they had been exiled, they were local tyrants who had been operating for many years. The 3 cities of Xianxia could be considered as a buffer zone between the northern borderline and Dongqing. At the same time, it was also a lawless area where many smuggled goods were the most rampant. Most of these goods were war resources and the profits were huge. Even the second prince could not help but be tempted by them. However, the happy time did not pass for long. An urgent message came to his ears. Report. The loud and urgent voice of the messenger came from outside the room. The second prince was holding a wine bottle and drinking with someone. When he heard the voice, his dashing eyebrows knitted together in displeasure. What happened? How dare you disturb my mood? The messenger's breathing was rapid, and there was a hint of nervousness in his voice. Your Highness, the patrolling cavalry found the corpses of our soldiers outside Nanshan County. A total of 25 people. What? The strong smell of alcohol came out of his nostrils. The second prince slammed the wine bottle on the table and a deafening bang was heard. The advisor beside him stopped smiling and asked the messenger before the second prince lost his temper. Who killed them? How did the 25 people die? The messenger told him everything in detail. Last night, during the handover of the patrol, a team of cavalry did not return. The next day, the patrolling cavalry found the corpses of the missing people not far from their post. There were signs of a struggle near the corpses. When the advisor heard this, his heart skipped a beat. Not good. Where are the corpses now? Outside the hall. Bring them up. The second prince's chest surged with anger. He lifted his leg and flipped the wine table. I want to see who dares to do this. The loud bang shocked the singers and dancers in the hall, and they did not dare to move. They trembled like quails. After a series of footsteps, the soldiers of the northern borderline carried the corpses into the hall. Other than the corpses, there were many clues found at the scene. The most important of them was a token. This token was none other than the token of a Chongzhou soldier. The weapons left behind and the words carved on the weapons all pointed to Chongzhou. After seeing this solid evidence, the second prince clenched his fists in anger and gritted his teeth. Lu Shi, I haven't found trouble with her and she's already stirring up trouble. The second prince's anger soared. The advisor beside him groaned. Your Highness, we still need to investigate further. To conclude that Chongzhou's Lu Shi provoked us so hastily, what if it's not? Before the advisor could finish, the second prince interrupted him. What's so hasty about this? Besides Lu Shi, who else would do such a thing? Besides, even if Lu Shi didn't do it, so what? Sooner or later, I and Lu Shi will have to fight. The second prince volunteered to come to the 3 cities of Xianxia. He wanted to use the 3 cities as a springboard to sneak attack Jiang Pingji's granary. He wanted to rest for 2 days before making a move. Now that Chongzhou could not sit still and test them, how could the second prince tolerate it? The advisor was speechless. For some reason he felt that this matter was unreliable. The second prince said, Lu Shi killed 25 of my men. I will repay him tenfold. The advisor's eyelids twitched violently. He watched as the second prince sent someone to invite the soldiers to discuss military matters. When I take over her granary, Lu Shi will have no more grain. Let's see how arrogant she can be then. According to the map, there were a total of 3 granaries. The second prince had already sent people to check these 3 places. Almost all of them had stored 2 million dong of military rations. What did this mean? 300,000 dong was enough for 100,000 soldiers to eat for more than a month. The grain that Lu Shi had accumulated over the years was enough for 100,000 soldiers to fight for 2 years. It was a pity that Lu Shi did not have a good eye for using people. He actually leaked the distribution map of such an important granary. Once she ran out of grain, she would be dead. The second prince looked in the direction of Chongzhou and gritted his teeth. If I can't transport the grain, I won't leave a single grain for you. Chapter 943. Jiang Pingji had planted informants in the 3 cities of Xianxia early in the morning. She received the news as soon as the second prince's army entered the city. Finally, there's a battle to fight. If I don't fight, the weapons in my hands are going to rust. When Fu Wang received the news, he didn't even have time to change his armor before hurrying to the main tent. Li Yun, who was passing by with him, saw this and laughed helplessly as he shook his head. These few years of training have really stifled General Fu. Fu Wang had a warlike gene in his bones, so he couldn't settle down at all. After training for a few years and living a comfortable life, he felt uncomfortable all over. Usually he could only rely on a lot of exercise and training soldiers to vent his excess energy. Because the training was too heavy, Fu Wang's soldiers complained incessantly. If it wasn't for Jiang Pingji who couldn't stand it anymore and lightened the training load of the troops, someone might have died. Fu Wang walked briskly and said as he walked, "As a soldier, of course, we have to see blood often to maintain our sharpness." Why did he have to put on an act all day? No matter how well he acted, it was still fake. It's not that you didn't do a good job, it's just that you feel aggrieved. Fu Wang would often ask a few generals to spar with him. Other than Li Yun, who could exchange over 100 moves with him without being at a disadvantage, the others could not withstand his blows. Of course, the Wanzhou group had many generals who could fight, but people like Dian Yan and Meng Hun were not in Chongzhou. It was always Li Yun who was fighting. After a while, Fu Wang also felt bored. "General Fu, if you really want to fight to your heart's content, why don't you just look for my lord?" It would have been better if Li Yun had not mentioned it, but once he did, Fu Wang could not help but twitch the corner of his mouth. If he fought with Li Yun, he had an 80% chance of winning, but if he fought with his lord, he basically had no chance of winning. He really didn't know what this woman ate growing up to be so good at fighting. When they arrived at the main tent, the strategists were already sitting in their seats. Jiang Pingji saw that everyone was present. She glanced at Qiguan Rang. He understood her intention and took out a declaration of war. "The barbarians slandered us for launching a sneak attack. In order to retaliate, they sent several teams of cavalry to harass the innocent civilians at the border. They massacred the villages there, burned, killed and looted. Such vile and provocative behavior cannot be tolerated." Jiang Pingji said, "Do you have any opinions?" Feng Zhen said, "I believe that we should attack with a large force to show our military might." Wei Xi seconded. Fu Wang had long been looking forward to fighting, so of course he wouldn't disagree. He wanted nothing more than to raise his hands and feet high. Li Yun also knew that the upcoming battle was to prepare for the northern expedition next year. His blood was boiling. How could he not respond? Very well. Everyone in the tent was her confidant, so it was impossible for them to raise any objections. Jiang Pingji said to Qiguan Rang, "I'll have to trouble Wenjing to announce this declaration to the world, so that the world knows that it's not us who want to fight, it's the barbarians of the northern borderline who have gone too far." Qiguan Rang bowed to the end and said, "Yes." After going through the formalities, the next step was the crucial strategic deployment. The barbarians of the northern borderline have a set of fake maps of granaries. They are in Sangyamo, Lijiang and Chaowu. The person leading the troops was the second prince of the northern borderline. This person was greedy and self-opinionated. He definitely wanted to eat up the 3 granaries worth of grain. However, the granary was huge, so this person would definitely mobilize a large number of troops and even a large portion of the garrison. In this way, the defense of the 3 cities would be quite weak. "Jingtu, I'll give you 10,000 troops. Can you conquer the 3 cities in 2 days? Jiang Pingji raised her head and called Fu Wang's name. Fu Wang had been tense all along. When he heard his name, he immediately stepped forward. "Yes, General." Using 10,000 troops to conquer the 3 cities of Shangyu, which Dongqing had been longing for more than a decade, in 2 days? If this was in the past, it would definitely be a fantasy. But now it was different. Jiang Pingji had calculated. According to the various conditions she had created today, it might not be impossible. The second prince of the northern borderline was too greedy. He had the idea of eating up the 3 granaries. It was impossible for him to rely on the 20,000 private troops that he had brought. In order to gather enough manpower, this person had to transfer the garrison of the 3 cities. Before the second prince's arrival, the average garrison of the 3 cities was about 10,000 people. After transferring a portion, how many people would be left? The 3 fake granaries had attracted most of the garrison forces, causing the 3 cities to be empty and weak. The 10,000 troops that she had allocated to Fu Wang were all elites who had been carefully trained for several years and were well equipped. They could definitely withstand such a concentrated battle. Not to mention 1 against 5, but 1 against 3 would not be a problem. If Fu Wang still could not conquer the 3 cities of Shangyu County before the reinforcements from the northern borderline arrived, it would be a disgrace to his reputation. "Han Mei." Li Yun stepped forward and quietly waited for orders. Jiang Pingji said, "I order you to lead 6,000 troops to ambush Lijiang. You must annihilate the enemy and not leave any loose ends." "Yes." "I plan to lead 6,000 troops to ambush Sangyamo. After the enemy is annihilated, Han Mei and I will meet up and cut off the enemy's main force. There were 3 fake granaries, Sangyamo, Lijiang and Chao Wu. Among them, Chao Wu's was the largest. It was almost the sum of the reserves of the other 2 granaries. After discussing with a few strategists, Jiang Pingji unanimously believed that the headstrong second prince would personally lead the troops to ambush Chao Wu. After all, there was the most food there. The evacuation route was the smoothest. The second prince had a penchant for doing things himself and showing off his military strength. In conclusion, it was most likely that the enemy would lead the main force to ambush Chao Wu. In order to delay time and confuse the second prince's judgment, Jiang Pingji placed a lot of food in Chao Wu. Transporting the food would delay their marching speed. When Jiang Pingji and Li Yun waited and devoured the enemy's forces, they could take a shortcut to intercept and ambush the second prince's main force. It would be best if they could capture the second prince alive. If not, they would just kill him. They had to meet up with Fu Wang before the reinforcements at the borders of the north borderline could react. To prevent any accidents, Jiang Pingji ordered the remaining troops to stand guard. After assigning tasks to the generals, Jiang Pingji swiftly and decisively assigned tasks to the strategists. At that moment, the whole main tent was filled with a tense atmosphere. It even affected the viewers in the streaming room. Lao Ciji Lianming. After so many years, I finally see the streamer's handsome side. Marin Wei Zixiao. Hello everyone. Let me introduce you. This is my boyfriend Lord Jiang Pingji. Zhugonggong Jiang Pingji. Oh my, click. Beauty Wei Ziximilan Danguzi. To the person above, are you trying to stir up trouble? Please respect such a hot-blooded scene. Gui Kai Guo Fengxiao. High energy warning ahead. Friends on the blue bullet screen, if you're not used to blood, you'd better leave the streaming room quickly. Let me say this in advance. Our streamer is very cruel. The content of her streaming would scare the timid people out of their wits. The viewers on the red bullet screen were delighted to see this. The viewers on the blue bullet screen were not to be outdone. Although they did not understand, they felt that it was awesome. How could they leave the streaming room and fulfill the wishes of the viewers on the red bullet screen? No, they would not leave. Finally, I've been preparing for more than 3 years. Everyone, it's all up to you. It was time to let the north borderline see her fangs. Chapter 944. The night was gloomy, the moon was dark, and the wind was strong. Hearing that the second prince was going to fight in person, the guards and advisors around him felt like their heads were going to explode. Your Highness, your body is precious. Swords have no eyes on the battlefield. If you are accidentally hurt, we won't be able to answer to the king. His personal guards tried to dissuade him, and his advisors also echoed him. However, the second prince had a headstrong temperament and felt very good about himself. He said, I studied hard with the martial arts master. Even my father praised me as a warrior of the northern borderline. How can I be afraid of death? Before he was an adult, he had defeated his martial arts master, defeated several guards who were his sparring partners, and killed the enemy bravely on the battlefield. He always brought back a lot of trophies. He was the brave and powerful man of the northern borderline. How could the weak soldiers of the Central Plains hurt him? The northern borderline was not peaceful. There were many voices within. If a small tribe developed too fast or did not obey the orders of the imperial court, it would inevitably lead to an expedition by the imperial court. However, such small fights were usually used for the second generation of the nobles of the northern borderline. The second prince had led troops on several expeditions and won every time. This made him arrogant and complacent, and he could not even see his own abilities clearly. As a prince, it was enough to stay in the rear and wait for military achievements. Why did he have to go to the front to cause trouble and make things difficult for his teammates? Did he not know what his own abilities were? The advisors and guards repeatedly tried to persuade the second prince, but not only did they not persuade him, they even caused him to reprimand and insult. In the end, he stubbornly said, "No need to persuade me anymore. I have made up my mind." The more the people around him tried to persuade him, the angrier he got, and the more he wanted to prove himself. Lu Shi, a woman, could kill the enemy on the battlefield. He, a brave man of the northern borderline, was inferior to a woman? Wait until I catch Lu Shi myself. The second prince looked around and snorted as if he was mocking. Although he was headstrong, the second prince also knew that his life was precious. and he would still listen to the advisor's arrangements in some areas. He asked the vanguard troops to change into the uniforms of the Han soldiers and raise Jiang Pingji's flag. It was best if they did not encounter the enemy, but if they encountered the enemy's patrol troops, they could use it to get away with it. The night was dark and windy, and it was suitable for robbery. The second prince ordered everyone to hold wooden chopsticks in their mouths and cover their mouths with cloth. They were not allowed to make any noise. The 12,000 soldiers split into several groups and advanced towards Chao Wu along the small paths on the map. Because of the detailed map in his hand, the second prince led his troops to avoid several waves of sentries, and the journey was more daunting than dangerous. As they approached Chao Wu's granary, the number of patrols increased. Even with the cover of night, they were still caught red-handed. "Who is it?" The second prince panicked. The vanguard officer beside him replied in fluent Mandarin of the Central Plains. "We were sent by Lu Prefecture Overseer to reinforce the granary. The prefecture magistrate is worried that the barbarians of the northern borderline will attack the granary." This vanguard official was also a talent. When he lied, his face didn't turn red and he didn't even pant. He even revealed a look of awe-inspiring righteousness. The night was too dark and there was some distance between them, so the guards couldn't see how many people were with the second prince. They asked a few questions and let them pass. The second prince was relieved, but then he felt a little disdainful. That's all. Perhaps the luck of the first half of the night had run out. The second prince encountered several patrols in a row, and they were getting more and more adept at dealing with them. Unknowingly, he had been delayed for an hour. At that moment, they were less than a quarter of an hour away from Chao Wu's granary. Compared to the smooth journey on the second prince's side, the other two routes did not have such preferential treatment. Along the way they only encountered 3 waves of patrols, and they used the same method of lying to fool them. Little did they know that the patrols under Jiang Pingji were different from other patrols. Before dealing with each other, they had to match the secret signal. If the secret signal didn't match, they would be killed. Of course, it was different today. The patrols had received instructions from their superiors that if they met someone they couldn't match the secret signal with, they should not make a sound and cooperate with the other party's performance. The North Borderline thought that their operation was smooth, but they didn't know that their every move was within the enemy's expectations. Li Jiang's granary. Li Yun chewed on some hay in his mouth. He held his spear with one hand and wiped the tip of the spear with the other. His sharp eyes were surging with the desire to fight. Nuanyuan, wait for me to return." Li Yun threw the wiping cloth aside. The hurried footsteps of his subordinates were getting closer. "Commander Li Yun, the enemy has formed a formation and surrounded the granary." Just in time. Li Yun straightened his body. He grabbed the white reins of his warhorse with one hand and nimbly flipped himself onto the horse. He held his spear high in the air. "Deploy the troops to meet the enemy." At that moment, the sound of fighting could be heard from outside the granary. 2,000 cavalrymen rushed towards Li Jiang's granary. Charge. Based on past experiences, the granary's defensive line would not be able to withstand a single wave of their charge. It would collapse 1,000 miles away. Not to mention that they had appeared suddenly. Chongzhou should not have been prepared. If they met the enemy without any preparation, it would be even more impossible to block the iron hooves of their cavalrymen. It was different this time. When the cavalrymen in rattan armor formed a formation and accelerated their charge, the front hooves of the horses suddenly missed their footing and they fell forward with great inertia. A group of human heads emerged from the ground. They held unknown sickle-like weapons in their hands and ruthlessly slashed at the legs of the horses, causing them to fall forward in pain. After doing that, they immediately retracted their heads into the ground and used the same trick on the second echelon who could not react in time. Dozens of circular trenches were dug around the Li Jiang granary in a radius of 200 feet. This was to deal with the first wave of the North Borderline's cavalrymen. The distance between the trenches did not follow any pattern. There were even circular waves. To conceal the existence of the trenches, the empty space was covered with grass. Coupled with the cover of the night, no one could see any clues. Near the center of the granary, there were densely packed caltrops scattered between the trenches. Seeing this, the troops from the North Borderline also realized that they had fallen into an ambush. Li Jiang's granary was not a piece of fatty meat. It was clearly a trap with fatty meat. However, the cavalry's speed was too fast. A distance of 200 feet was nothing at all. When they realized that it was an ambush and attempted to retreat, the first batch of cavalrymen had already rushed to the granary. "You want to retreat? Have you asked for the permission of the spear in my hand?" To make it easier to face the enemy, a small path about 5 feet wide was left in all directions of the granary. At the same time, a similar scene was happening in Sang Mo's granary. Jiang Pingji was someone who could not sit still. She did not like to mark documents and was passionate about personally fighting in battle. The north borderline was there to attack the granary and steal the grain. Apart from bringing weapons and troops, their troops also brought along a large number of carriages used to transport the grain. The troops at the front lost and their morale plummeted. The troops at the back tried to retreat. The carriages became an obstacle for their cavalrymen. They were stuck in one place and could not break through in all directions. The quality of the north borderline's cavalrymen was not bad. Although the performance at the back was embarrassing, the remaining cavalrymen began to organize a charge to break through. "Horse-slaying battalion, go forward and form a formation." The order was given. A whistling arrow soared into the sky. Chapter 945. Xingyuan. Who was the one with the high energy warning just now? Why don't you make it clear? W. No, the baby is going to vomit for a while. Has your streaming room always been so bloody and violent? F***ck me. You're going to split me and my horse in half? Streamer Wadijun. Why hasn't such a bloody and violent live broadcast room been shut down? Feng's remembrance. You make it sound like the streamer who promoted a certain color has been censored. Chow Lauda. Watching this kind of live stream in the middle of the night, it's really creepy. Why couldn't the cross-dimensional live stream be more harmonious? It was either pornographic or violent. Watching too much of it would affect the physical and mental health of young children. That was the content of the blue bullet screen. Compared to their panic, the red bullet screen viewers were much calmer. He was not surprised at all. Wuxia Zhongxing, the host isn't always so violent. She's usually reasonable. She only uses her fists when she can't be reasoned with. Those people from the northern borderline are asking for a beating. My streamer is so handsome that he has no friends. Host, when are you going to marry me? Bellflower in the starry sky. The streamer is a master of the aesthetics of violence. He gets more and more violent every time. In the past, he only knew how to chop people with axes. Now he could even chop people and horses in half. Full marks for that close-up just now. Jiang Pingji personally led the troops at Sang Mo's granary. When the two parties engaged in battle, she would act as a member of the Zhanma battalion. The horse-chopping battalion was a special battalion that she had specially trained to deal with the cavalry of the northern borderline. The weapons in their hands were all specially forged, and the modeo in their hands was incomparably sharp. The blades were heavy and broad. Compared to the speed of the cavalry, the horse-slaying battalion pursued stability and ruthlessness. They didn't need a lot of speed. They just needed to coordinate with other units to resist the cavalry and reduce the pressure on all sides. The soldiers of the horse-chopping camp were all carefully selected from the various battalions. Their pay was twice as high as that of ordinary soldiers, and their daily training was also much heavier. Because the armors and weapons used by the horse-chopping camp were heavier, the requirement for the soldiers' stamina and strength was higher. If they didn't have a strong physique and strength, they wouldn't be able to fight for a long time. In order to increase their endurance in battle, Jiang Pingji also allowed the soldiers of the Zhanma battalion to adopt the improved three-stage battle tactic of the crossbowmen. Take turns to lighten the load. In addition to all kinds of high-intensity training, the various military camps would also hold regular military exercises. Different units would cooperate and fight against each other. Although the military drill was fake, Jiang Pingji let the veterans lead the new recruits in pursuit of a simulated battle environment. Most of the soldiers under him had never seen blood before, but their combat skills and obedience to orders were not inferior to elite soldiers. The streaming room was always the Jiang Pingji Jiangzhang's perspective. She, who had always walked the agile route, gave up on speed and changed the weapon in her hand from a spear to a heavy zamadeo. With every swing of the blade, the audience could clearly see the entire process of the blade slicing through flesh. She did not deliberately restrain her strength. The heavy zamadeo in her hand was like nothing. chopping. Or jiang, jiang, blood, blood, blood. The audience of the stream. Thing, thing, thing. Hoo 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 hoo. The tie with the horse. The audience in the streaming room saw with their own eyes that Jiang Pingji swung her sword downwards. Like watching a watermelon, she split open the body of a soldier from the northern borderline's head. She also cut the warhorse under him into two at the waist. Jiang Pingji. Thing, 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 thing. Most of the northern borderline cavalry was light cavalry. They followed the rogue policy of running away if they couldn't win. They had always been a headache for the Dongqing military. However, they were blocked by the wagon they brought. Jiang Pingji. The Zhanma battalion formed a curved formation to block their way. He surrounded them. He planned to wipe out the enemy. How could she let the meat fly away? Compared to Sang Yimou and Li Jiang, Chao Wu's granary was a rat's paradise. What kind of soldiers are Lu Shi's? The soldiers of the Central Plains are all useless. None of them can fight. The second prince broke through the defense of Chao Wu's granary. The defense of the camp was weak. They fought in a hurry. Soon they were defeated and ran in all directions. The second prince looked at Chao Wu's granary. He was proud of himself. Don't chase. Move the food. The second prince cut off the heads of the corpses. He tied their hair into knots and hung them on the saddle. These were his spoils of war. They were strong evidence of his military strength. He broke open the door of the granary. It was full of food. To be cautious, the second prince used the dagger at his waist to cut open a few bags of food. Clear yellow grains flowed out like water. Lu Shi is rich. It's all good food. After confirming it, the second prince ordered people to move the food. The advisor followed the second prince. He felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what. After a while he said, "Your Highness, there's so much food in Chao Wu's granary. Why didn't Lu Shi send a large number of soldiers to guard it?" The second prince said, "A large number of soldiers? Didn't you see those deserters? There are at least 5,000 or 6,000 of them, right?" According to combat experience, the number of soldiers guarding the granary was about that. However, the advisor didn't know that there were only about 2,000 soldiers guarding the granary. The number of 5,000 or 6,000 was too much. The soldiers seemed disorderly, but they were actually prepared to flee. They ran in other directions. After several trips, it gave the illusion that there were 5,000 or 6,000 deserters. I heard that Lu Shi trained his soldiers for 3 or 5 years. His elite soldiers are like this. The advisor awkwardly found a way out for himself to avoid angering the second prince again. The second prince laughed and said, "Sheep are sheep. No matter how they train, how can they beat the wolves on the grassland?" The Han men of the Central Plains gave him the impression that they were weak bamboo poles that could be blown away by the wind. Such men couldn't even satisfy the Han women, let alone fight the valiant generals of the northern borderline. The entire granary of Chao Wu had a total of 1.4 million dawn of grain. Even if the second prince brought 12,000 soldiers and horses, they couldn't load all of them into the supply wagons in a short time. Moreover, they did not bring that many wagons with them. If I had known that there was so much grain here and that the soldiers guarding the grain were so weak, I would have brought 10 more wagons. In order not to waste food, every wagon was filled with grain. The wheels were deeply embedded in the mud. Not only were the wagons full of grain, but he also asked each cavalry to carry 2 bags of grain on their backs. Seeing this, the advisor's scalp went numb. The cavalry's advantage was their mobility. How could they run if they encountered danger with the heavy bags of grain on their backs? "Your Highness, this is not appropriate." Chapter 946. I know what you're worried about. Aren't you afraid of Lu Shi's sudden appearance? You're as timid as a mouse. The second prince laughed. His face was insolent and his eyes were filled with contempt and disdain. He said arrogantly, "So what if she comes? It just so happens that I lack a concubine to warm my bed. If she comes, I can reluctantly accept her. When I'm done playing, I'll let you have a taste of her to boost your courage." The advisor did not refute him because he knew that the second prince was in high spirits and no one could provoke him. He had long been accustomed to the second prince's arrogance. At this time he could only shake his head tiredly. He was hopeless. Now he could only hope that everything would go smoothly and nothing would go wrong along the way. However, some people could not stand nagging, such as Jiang Pingji, whom the advisor was worried about. The second prince smiled and said, "You're really worrying for nothing. I'll..." Before he finished speaking, the ground under his feet trembled slightly, as if something was rushing from afar. At first, the movement was so small that it was almost undetectable. As time went by, the movement became more and more obvious. The pebbles on the ground also trembled. The ground moved. This was the advisor's first reaction. His second reaction was... His heart skipped a beat and a terrible idea came to mind. Quickly abandon all the provisions. There's an enemy attack, the advisor roared. The second prince was about to turn over and get on the horse when he suddenly heard the roar. He stumbled and almost fell off the horse. What are you roaring for? Where did the enemy attack come from? The second prince's reaction was a beat slower. The trembling under his feet became more and more obvious. Only then did he realize that something was wrong. Is this an earthquake? The second prince did not think in the direction of the enemy attack at all. He thought that it was a natural disaster. No. It's not an earthquake. It's clearly an enemy attack. Your Highness, please give the order immediately to abandon the provisions and fight. The advisor's breathing was rapid and he was in a panic. It was dark around him as if there were countless giant beasts hibernating in the darkness and staring at him. A feeling of suffocation surged in his heart. The advisor lost his composure and shouted at the second prince, hoping to drown out the commotion around him. The second prince was angry and was about to speak when a scout came riding quickly on a horse. Whoa! The scout turned over and dismounted. He said to the second prince, "There are traces of enemies on the left flank." Unable to determine the specific number. The second prince's eyes widened in shock. How could there be enemies? Could it be that the granary guard who just ran away called for help? That's not right. Chao Wu's granary is 2 days' journey from Lu Shi's military camp. It's only been a few hours. How can he call for reinforcements in time? When the advisor saw that the second prince was still staring at him, he was so angry that he wanted to jump up and curse. Was there even a need to think about such a stupid question? It was clearly premeditated. At this time, the right-wing scout also hurried over on horseback. Report. Our right wing has discovered an unknown number of enemies. The second prince had led his troops to clear out small tribes, but his combat experience was of no value at all. He was dumbfounded when he encountered a big scene. Quickly, abandon the rations and prepare for battle. The advisor was so angry that his face turned red. Now he could not count on the second prince as a teammate at all. He could only rely on him to overstep his authority. The advantage of the cavalry of the northern borderline was their mobility. How could they fight a battle with 2 big sacks of provisions on their backs? Once the horse was engaged in battle with the enemy, it would not be able to gallop. It could only coordinate with the enemy's attacks or trample on them. The advantage of speed would disappear. At this time, if they carried 2 heavy sacks of provisions to fight a battle, perhaps the soldiers on the horses would not die of exhaustion, but the horses would collapse. The second prince's eyes were red. He stared at the advisor and clenched his teeth. Listen to my order. Abandon the rations and form a formation to fight. They had brought too many wagons that were used to steal provisions. They could not form a formation at all. The advantage of charging to cut through the enemy's formation was also lost. Everything happened too suddenly. The second prince, the leader, was a fool. The people below him could only be at a loss like headless flies. Fortunately, they still had the qualities of the soldiers of the northern borderline. When they encountered traces of the enemy, they wanted to form a formation immediately. Due to the obstruction of the wagons, the process seemed slow and inefficient. While they were in a mess, the enemy's army had already attacked from the left and right flanks, outflanking them. Jiang Pingji led the vanguard battalion of the cavalry and took the lead. She took the longbow from the back of the horse and lit the arrow. She let go of the reins while charging and easily pulled the bow to a full moon. Release. Jiang Pingji released the bowstring when she was less than 100 feet away from the enemy troops of the northern borderline. After a buzzing sound, the burning arrow streaked across the sky with a smear of orange and shot into the enemy's territory. After the arrow was fired, she took control of the reins again. She steered the warhorse under her to turn quickly to the other side. The soldiers of the cavalry battalion could not shoot from a long distance like her, but they did a good job. Han Mei really has a tacit understanding. He came neither early nor late. As the saying goes, it is better to come at the right time than to come early. Li Yun's sneak attack was coordinated perfectly. Jiang Pingji had a carefree smile on her face. She galloped on the horse and shot a few waves of fire arrows, all aimed at the cavalry of the northern borderline. Xianxia Mingguzi, streamer, the rations are all piled up there. If you fire the fire arrows, won't they all burn? They knew Jiang Pingji's temperament. She was generous to others, but she was stingy with her own food. Every time she always ate the last grain of rice. To let such a thrifty person set fire to the food that the people had painstakingly cultivated was really heart-wrenching. Pian Kasai, if you don't sacrifice your child, you won't be able to catch the wolf. Using such a batch of rations to exchange for tens of thousands of soldiers and horses from the northern borderline is a great deal. If the cavalry of the northern borderline were to enter the battlefield, not only would the streamer lose rations, but she would also lose many elite troops that she had painstakingly trained. Moreover, didn't you notice that after the fire arrows were fired, the fire quickly grew bigger? After being reminded by the audience in the streaming room, many people came to their senses. That's right, the fire was too big. Although it was a dry and flammable season, it shouldn't have caught fire so easily, right? At that moment, a veteran in the streaming room pointed out the key point. Yewu Yenling, there's a problem with the rations. The audience strenuously observed. Indeed, they discovered that the stray fire arrows had pierced the rations and the fire had spread quickly. Nuzwang Xinghan, the streamer is indeed wicked. Other than the outermost rations in the Chao Wu granary that are real, the ones inside are all fake, right? No matter how vigilant the enemy is, it is impossible for them to open up all the rations and check them. Just as the audience guessed, Jiang Pingji only put tens of thousands of dawn of real rations in the Chao Wu granary, the rest were all fake. Xinjia, but I have a doubt. If it's fake rations, won't the grain bag feel different when touched? How could Jiang Pingji not consider this problem? She asked someone to smear the inside of the grain bag with a sticky liquid, then rolled it in the rations and stuck a layer of rations on it. Chapter 947. At this time, not only the audience in the live broadcast room found something fishy, but the cavalry of the northern borderline also found something wrong. The advisor felt his teeth tremble. He raised his hand to pull out a dagger and fiercely cut open the grain bag. The inside of the grain bag was thick with grain, but apart from this layer it was full of hay, firewood, and stones. It was fake. It was all fake. They were fooled. At this moment the advisor regretted it. Lu Shi was able to get to where he was today. How could he be an ordinary person who relied on his father? If the map of the granary was so easy to get, how could Lu Shi get to where he was today? From the beginning to the end, it was all Lu Shi's plan to lead their second prince here. In an instant the advisor's mind turned again and again. He even wanted to escape during the chaos. If he continued to follow the second prince, he wouldn't even know when he would die. But the advisor also knew that he was just a scholar. Without the protection of the soldiers, he might be shot into a hornet's nest as soon as he went out. On the other side, the advisor was experiencing mental torture, and the second prince was not in a good situation either. He had never experienced such a big battle before. When he conquered a small tribe, it seemed that he was the one in command, but in fact, it was the same without him. It was just a small tribe. How could they fight against the iron hooves of the northern borderline? The victory of the small tribe made the second prince arrogant, and he had no idea of his real ability. He thought that if others praised him for being brave and good at fighting, he would really be brave and good at fighting. He didn't know that if he was not the second prince of the northern borderline king, he was not even a fart. At most, he was an arrogant bastard. Don't panic. Don't panic. I will kill anyone who dares to panic. Get into formation. Get into formation. Get into formation. Do you hear me? Damn, who dares to escape? No matter how stupid he was, he knew how bad the situation was. The fire spread and the war horse was frightened and kept running around. Took the second prince a lot of effort to calm it down. The soldiers around him were in a mess like headless flies. He was angry and pulled out his sword to cut off the head of the person next to him, relying on bloody means to win a trace of calmness. Needless to say, this trick really worked, and the formation of the northern borderline soldiers finally had some shape. The advisor hurriedly said, Your Highness, the most important thing right now is your safety. His words reminded the second prince of something. Nothing was more important than his life. Round after round of fire arrows were fired from the outside. It was as if Lu Shi's soldiers were surrounding them from all directions. It was impossible to find a way out. If the cavalry wanted to charge out of the sea of fire, Lu Shi's soldiers would stop them and force them back. The second prince grabbed his advisor's wrist in a panic. How do we break out? The advisor said, naturally we'll gather our forces and break through from the weakest point. How could he ask such a stupid question? This teammate was too much of a scammer. The second prince took a few deep breaths and summoned his personal guards to prepare to break out of the encirclement. Although he had 12,000 soldiers with him, most of them were cavalry. If the terrain was open, breaking out of the encirclement would not be a problem. How could a two-legged man outrun a four-legged horse? Unfortunately, they were also carrying a large number of supply wagons, which were filled with heavy sacks of grain, further limiting the range of movement of the cavalry. Apart from that, Jiang Pingji also set fire to the rations on the carriages. They had no time to care about anything else. Lu Shi be *T. The second prince gritted his teeth in anger. He did not know what went wrong, but he knew that there was something wrong with the map he had obtained. If it was not premeditated, how could Lu Shi have calculated it so accurately? It was estimated that not only Chao Wu's granary, but Li Zhang's and Sang Mo's granaries were also ambushed. The second prince's eyes reddened when he thought of the private troops he had spent a lot of money to raise. Your Highness, now is not the time to be angry. Where there's life, there's hope. Your safety is more important. The advisor interrupted the second prince's thoughts. It was more important to escape now. What was the point of thinking so much? The two sides broke through the encirclement. The second prince, escorted by more than 1,000 elites, prepared to break out of the encirclement. When Jiang Pingji received the news, her face revealed a blood-stained and hideous smile. Escape? Have you asked me? After you catch him, break his legs. She put the bow and arrows back on the horse's back and picked up the heavy Mo sword again. Catch him alive. After Jiang Pingji's reminder, the audience in the streaming room realized that the enemy leader was about to escape. How could he do that? Lao Ciji Lianmeng. Although the streamer used a trick, they are still a group of cavalrymen. I look down on them for running away before the battle even starts. Cat Demon June. Running away when you can't win is the essence of cavalrymen. Usually it's either a small defeat or a big victory. It's probably unprecedented in history to be so miserable. Who asked them to be greedy? But then again, the person who made the plan was too evil. Let me worship for 2 seconds. But then again, who was the person who made the plan this time? The audience was stunned for a moment and almost forgot about it. Xianxia. This plan was made by Beauty Ci, the streamer, and Sunwen, right? But the chief planner is that old man Sunwen. This old man has a bright future. When he's done undercover, he'll be among the top strategists. The trick was used too well. Who was Sunwen? The audience was stunned for another 2 seconds. They couldn't be blamed for their poor memory. It was because Sunwen had never appeared in the streaming room and they hadn't seen him. Mo Linging, Sai Sunwen, I've personally witnessed the rise of another Prince Charming in the streaming room. Although Sunwen was an old man whose grandson was 7 or 8 years old, his charm didn't discriminate by age. The audience paid unprecedented attention to Sunwen. Jiang Pingji couldn't care less about the streaming room. She led the troops to chase after the second prince and his men. What a joke. Capturing the second prince would be considered a real victory. If they let this fat fish escape, the value of this operation would be reduced by at least 50%. The advisor held the reins tightly and leaned over the horse's back. The warhorse was too bumpy. He felt as if his internal organs were going to be shaken out. There are pursuers behind us. The second prince only cared about running for his life. His nerves had long been stretched taut. Hearing that there were pursuers behind him, he was so anxious that he whipped the horse's butt hard and tried to speed up. Hurry, 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 he screamed anxiously in his heart. Unfortunately, the gods of the grassland didn't hear his prayers. The god of slaughter had already drawn his bow and arrow from behind him. He pulled the bow fully and suddenly released it. There was a buzzing sound in his ears like a cool breeze blowing beside his ears. In the next moment he felt something sharp piercing into his right shoulder. The sharp pain spread from his shoulder to his whole body. He couldn't maintain his posture. He screamed and fell directly from the horse to the ground. Capture the barbarians of the northern borderline alive. Jiang Pingji put away her bow and arrow. She took out her mo sword and chopped off the heads of several people at the end of the enemy troops. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.